Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they need help, even if it means marrying a stranger. Sometimes the loneliest thing a person can have is everything, when there's no one real to share it with. Brenna Larke came to Millstone, Wyoming with empty pockets and a plan to marry for security. Beckett Drury had money and land, but wanted a wife to quiet the town gossip. Their deal was simple, a quiet arrangement, no love, no questions. But Beckett never expected his new wife to work harder than his ranch hands or stand taller than most men when trouble came. When drought hit and neighbors turned desperate, this marriage of convenience began to mean something neither of them planned for. Could two people who married for all the wrong reasons find something worth more than gold? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dust rose in small clouds behind Brenna Larke's mare as she rode down the main street of Millstone, Wyoming. It was the kind of town that looked like a dozen others scattered across the frontier. A single dirt road, flanked by weathered storefronts, a saloon with peeling paint, a general store with barrels of flour and salt lined up on the porch, and a church steeple that rose above everything else like it was keeping watch. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cattle pens at the edge of town, where men in dusty hats leaned against fence rails, conducting business in low voices and firm handshakes. Brenna had been riding for 3 days straight, and every muscle in her body knew it. Her clothes carried the smell of campfire smoke and trail dirt. The leather saddlebag slung across her horse's flank held everything she owned in this world. A change of clothes, a tin cup, a hunting knife with a bone handle, and the letter she'd carried for 10 years but never opened. The letter stayed at the bottom of the bag, beneath everything else, where she wouldn't have to think about it. She had come to Millstone with a purpose. No room for sentimentality, no time for second thoughts. At 28 years old, Brenna had learned that survival meant making hard choices and living with them. She'd grown up in the Montana mountains, raised by an older brother after their parents died of fever when she was 6. Her brother had taught her to hunt, to track, to read the weather in the clouds and the land in the way water moved. He'd also taught her that weakness got you killed, that asking for help was the same as admitting defeat. She'd believed him right up until the day she left, and by then it was too late to tell him he'd been wrong. The mountains had given her strength but no future. Years of trapping and trading had put some money in her pocket, but not enough to buy land or build anything lasting. She'd watched other women her age marry, have children, create homes. She told herself she didn't want those things, that freedom mattered more. But freedom turned cold on winter nights when you slept alone by a dying fire, and it didn't answer when you spoke into the darkness. So she'd made a decision. She would marry for security, plain and simple. She would find a man with means who needed a wife for his own reasons, and they would make an arrangement that benefited them both. No pretense of love, no false promises. Just an honest transaction between two people who knew what they wanted. She'd heard about Millstone from a trader passing through her last camp. He'd mentioned a cattle broker named Beckett Drury, who'd recently inherited his family's ranch and was looking to settle down. The trader had laughed when he said it. Man's got more money than sense, but he's colder than a January creek. Every eligible woman in 3 counties has tried to catch his eye, but he just works and counts his money. Town council's been pushing him to marry, says a man in his position needs a proper household. That had been enough for Brenna. A rich man who didn't want romance, who saw marriage as a social obligation. That was exactly what she needed. She could keep house, manage a property, work as hard as any hired hand. In exchange, she'd have a roof over her head, food that didn't come from what she could hunt or trap, and the security of knowing she wouldn't freeze too. Death alone in some mountain pass when her luck finally ran out. She guided her mare toward the hitching post outside a modest boarding house, with a hand-painted sign that read, Galloway's. A woman in her 50s stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She had kind eyes and silver hair pinned up in a practical bun. "Help you, miss?" The woman called out. "Looking for a room," Brenna said, dismounting. Her legs were stiff from the saddle. "Got one available. 2 bits a night includes breakfast." The woman looked Brenna over without judgment, just the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen all types come through her door. "Name's Harriet Galloway. You can call me Mrs. Galloway, everyone does." Brenna Larke. She pulled her saddlebag down and slung it over her shoulder. "I'll take the room for a week, maybe longer." Mrs. Galloway nodded and led her inside. The boarding house was clean and spare, with the smell of bread baking in the back. The room she showed Brenna was small but tidy, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the street. "You come far?" Mrs. Galloway asked, lingering in the doorway. "Montana. Up in the mountains. Long ride by yourself. You meeting family here?" "No family," Brenna said. She set her saddlebag on the bed. "I'm here on business." Mrs. Galloway's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't press. "Well, if you need anything, I'm usually in the kitchen. Supper's at 6 if you want it. Extra quarter for the meal." After the woman left, Brenna stood at the window and watched the town move through its late afternoon rhythms. A wagon rolled past loaded with supplies. 2 children chased each other down the boardwalk, their mother calling after them. Across the street, outside the saloon, 3 men stood talking. Their voices too low to make out. She needed to find Beckett Drury, needed to see him for herself, assess whether he was the man she thought he might be. The trader had said Drury conducted most of his business at the cattle pens in the afternoon, finalizing deals before supper. She had time. Brenna washed the worst of the trail dirt from her face and hands, changed into her one clean shirt, and headed back out. The cattle pens were at the south end of town, and she could hear the low sounds of livestock before she saw them. The smell of manure and hay hung in the air, familiar and oddly comforting. She'd grown up around animals. They were easier to understand than people. A dozen men stood around the pens, some inspecting cattle, others talking in clusters. She spotted him almost immediately, not because anyone pointed him out, but because everything about him suggested authority. He stood slightly apart from the others, dressed better than a working rancher, but not flashy. Dark vest over a pressed shirt, clean hat, boots that had been cared for. He was maybe 35, tall and lean, with a face that might have been handsome if it hadn't looked so closed off. When he spoke to the man beside him, his voice carried the tone of someone used to having the final word. Brenna watched him negotiate the sale of 6 head of cattle. His manner was cold, efficient. He didn't smile or offer false pleasantries. He stated his price, listened to the counteroffer, and then said no with such finality that the other man simply nodded and accepted the original terms. Money changed hands. Papers were signed. The whole transaction took less than 5 minutes. When the other man walked away, Beckett Drury stood alone for a moment, making notes in a small ledger he pulled from his vest pocket. His expression gave nothing away. He might have just concluded a significant deal or settled a grocery bill. It all seemed to matter the same to him, which was to say, not much at all. This was the man she would marry. Brenna felt no particular emotion about the thought, which seemed appropriate. She turned away from the cattle pens and walked back toward the boarding house, already planning her approach. That evening, she ate supper in Mrs. Galloway's dining room. 2 other boarders were there, an older man who worked as a clerk at the general store and a young couple passing through on their way to California. The conversation was polite and forgettable. Brenna answered questions about where she'd come from, but offered nothing about why she'd come to Millstone. After the meal, Mrs. Galloway sat down beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "You seem like a woman who knows her own mind," the older woman said, "so I won't pry too much. But if you're planning to stay in Millstone, you should know it's a decent town. People here look out for each other, mostly. Brenna asked. Mrs. Galloway stirred sugar into her coffee. "Well, there's always a few who put their own interests first. But that's true everywhere, I suppose. What about Beckett Drury?" The name hung in the air for a moment. Mrs. Galloway's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "You know Mr. Drury?" "Heard of him. Thought I might conduct some business with him." "What kind of business would that be?" Brenna met the woman's gaze directly. "Personal business." Mrs. Galloway set her cup down carefully. Mr. Drury's not an easy man to know. Lost his parents young, inherited the ranch when he was barely 20, built it into something bigger than his father ever did, but he did it by being harder than most folks can manage. He's fair in his deals, I'll give him that, but he doesn't give anything away for free. That's fine, Brenna said. I'm not asking for charity. No, Mrs. Galloway said slowly, studying her. I don't imagine you are. The next morning, Brenna rose early and dressed with care. She braided her dark hair and wore her best clothes, which still showed the wear of hard living but were clean and mended. She walked to the general store and learned that Beckett Drury would be at the cattle auction that afternoon, held in the large lot behind the feed supply. She spent the morning getting a sense of the town. She stopped by the sheriff's office and saw a graying man with a star on his chest talking to a rancher about fence lines. She passed the church and watched people arrive for a midweek service. She observed the way people interacted, the way money changed hands, the way respect was given or withheld. By the time the auction started, she'd formed a clear picture of Millstone's social structure. Beckett Drury stood near the top, but his position came from wealth, not affection. People dealt with him because they had to, not because they wanted to. The auction was crowded and loud. Men shouted bids, while livestock shuffled nervously in temporary pens. Brenna stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. Beckett bought 3 prime steers at prices that made other bidders shake their heads. His face remained impassive throughout. When the auction ended, he stayed behind to finalize paperwork with the auctioneer. Brenna waited until the crowd thinned, then approached. He looked up from his papers as she drew near, his expression politely neutral. "Mr. Drury," she said. "Yes?" His tone suggested he'd dealt with strangers approaching him regularly, and most of them wanted something. "My name is Brenna Larke. I'd like to discuss a business arrangement with you." His eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing her. "What kind of arrangement?" "A marriage." For the first time since she'd observed him, his expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to show surprise. "I'm sorry, what?" "I'm proposing marriage," Brenna said calmly. "I understand you're looking for a wife. I'm looking for security. I think we could come to mutually beneficial terms." Beckett stared at her for a long moment. Then unexpectedly he closed his ledger. "Walk with me." They moved away from the auction lot toward the quieter end of town. He didn't speak until they were out of earshot of others. "You're serious," he said. "It wasn't quite a question. I wouldn't waste your time otherwise." "Why me?" "You have means. You need a wife for social reasons, not romantic ones. I need security and I'm willing to work for it. I can manage a household, handle livestock, do any labor that needs doing. I won't interfere with your business, and I won't expect affection or attention. It would be a practical arrangement." He studied her face, looking for something, deception perhaps, or desperation. "What's your situation that you'd propose something like this?" "I've lived alone for 10 years, making a living trapping and trading in the mountains. It's a hard life with no future in it. I have some money saved, but not enough to buy property or build anything lasting. I'm realistic about my options. You could marry for love." "I could," Brenna agreed. "But I don't trust it. Love makes people foolish. This would be honest, a transaction between 2 people who know what they're getting." Beckett was quiet for a moment, and Brenna saw something like respect flicker across his face. "You're direct. I'll give you that. Do you want time to think about it? What would you expect from me? A home, food, the security of your name and your resources. I'll keep your house, work your land, and maintain whatever appearances you need maintained. Beyond that, you can live your life however you choose. And if I agree, when would this happen?" "As soon as you're willing. No point in delay." He looked out toward the mountains visible in the distance, his jaw working like he was chewing over her proposition. Finally, he turned back to her. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow. Meet me here at noon." "Fair enough," Brenna said. She walked back to the boarding house feeling neither hopeful nor worried. She'd made her offer. Now it was simply a matter of whether he'd accept. The next day, she returned to the auction lot at noon. Beckett was already there, standing in the same spot as before. When he saw her, he nodded once. "I've thought about your proposal," he said. "I have conditions. I expected you would. We maintain separate bedrooms. You handle the household and any ranch work you choose to take on, but you don't interfere with my business decisions. If anyone asks, we tell them it was a practical arrangement that made sense for both of us. No lies about love or romance. Agreed. We can end the arrangement after 1 year, if either of us chooses. After that, if we continue, we revisit terms. Brenna considered this. Acceptable. Then we have an agreement. He extended his hand and she shook it. His grip was firm but not aggressive. We'll marry Friday. Judge Aldrich can perform the ceremony at the courthouse. Friday it is. He released her hand and pulled out his ledger, making a note like he'd just finalized any other transaction. You'll need to move your things to the ranch after the ceremony. I'll have one of my men pick you up from the boarding house. I can ride myself. Suit yourself. He looked at her once more, his expression unreadable. This is unusual, Miss Larke. Most practical things are, she replied. As she walked back through town, Brenna felt the weight of what she'd just done settling over her. She'd committed to marrying a stranger. In 3 days, her entire life would change. But the alternative, years more of scraping by alone, growing older and more vulnerable with each passing season, seemed worse. That evening, Mrs. Galloway noticed the slight shift in Brenna's demeanor and asked if everything was all right. Brenna told her simply that she would be married on Friday to Mr. Drury and would be leaving the boarding house afterward. Mrs. Galloway's face registered shock, then concern, then something like resignation. That's very sudden. It's practical, Brenna said. Mr. Drury's not a warm man, dear. I'm not looking for warmth. I'm looking for security. The older woman was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and squeezed Brenna's hand. I hope you find what you're looking for. Truly I do, Brenna squeezed back. Thank you. The days before the wedding passed quietly. Brenna spent time preparing, making sure her few possessions were organized and ready for the move. She tried not to think too much about what married life with Beckett Drury would look like. That would reveal itself soon enough. On Friday morning, she dressed in her best clothes and walked to the courthouse alone. The building was plain and functional, its interior cool and echoing. Beckett was already there, standing near the judge's chambers, dressed in a dark suit. He looked every bit the successful businessman, composed, controlled, unreadable. Judge Aldrich, a portly man with wire-rimmed spectacles, greeted them with professional courtesy but obvious curiosity. Mrs. Galloway arrived to serve as a witness, as did Gideon, Beckett's ranch foreman, a weathered man in his 60s, with calculating eyes that took Brenna's measure immediately. The ceremony was brief and mechanical. They stood before the judge and recited vows that felt hollow, even as they spoke them. There was no music, no flowers, no family, just words and signatures on paper. When Judge Aldrich pronounced them married, there was no kiss, no embrace. Beckett nodded once, and Brenna returned it. The marriage certificate was signed. Brenna's hand was steady as she wrote her name. Beckett's signature was crisp and efficient. The motion of someone who signed important documents every day. Congratulations, Judge Aldrich said. Though his tone suggested he wasn't sure congratulations were appropriate, outside the courthouse, Mrs. Galloway hugged Brenna. You take care of yourself, she whispered. And remember, you're always welcome back for coffee. Thank you, Brenna said, and meant it. Beckett gestured toward his buggy, a well-maintained vehicle that spoke of money and care. I'll drive. You can follow on your horse if you prefer, or we can have someone bring it later. I'll follow, Brenna said. She needed the ride, needed the time alone with her thoughts before arriving at what would now be her home. The ranch was 5 miles outside town, accessible by a well-maintained road that cut through grassland, beginning to show the yellow tinge of insufficient rain. As they traveled, Brenna noticed the landscape, good grazing land, but thirsty. The creek they crossed was running lower than it should for this time of year. The Drury ranch revealed itself gradually. First the fence lines, well-maintained and straight. Then the outbuildings, a large barn, a bunkhouse for ranch hands, storage sheds, a stable. And finally, the main house, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and shuttered windows. It was bigger than Brenna had expected, built solidly from timber and stone. It looked like the kind of place that would stand for generations if properly maintained. Beckett stopped the buggy in front of the house and waited as Brenna dismounted. A young ranch hand appeared to take her horse, nodding respectfully but saying nothing. "This is your home now," Beckett said, his tone formal. "I'll show you inside." The interior was clean but impersonal. The furniture was well made and functional, the walls bare of decoration except for a few landscape paintings that looked like they'd come with the house. The kitchen was large and well equipped. The sitting room had comfortable chairs arranged with no particular warmth. Beckett led her upstairs and showed her to a bedroom at the end of the hall. It was spacious, with a large bed, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the back pasture. "This will be your room," he said. "Mine is at the other end of the hall. The bathroom is between them." Brenna set her saddlebag on the bed. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and dust. "Meals are at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening," Beckett continued. "The kitchen is yours to manage as you see fit. Gideon handles the ranch operations, but if you want to help with any of the work, talk to him first. He'll make sure you don't get in the way." "Understood. Do you have any questions?" "No. Then I'll leave you to settle in. I have work to do." He turned to go, then paused. "Thank you for being straightforward about this arrangement, Miss Larke. Mrs. Drury, I should say." "Brenna is fine," she said. He nodded and left, his footsteps receding down the hall. Brenna stood alone in her new room, in her new house, as the wife of a man she'd known for 3 days. The afternoon light slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her spare clothes in the wardrobe and setting her tin cup and hunting knife on the dresser. The letter stayed at the bottom of the saddlebag unread. She wasn't ready to face what it contained. Maybe she never would be. That evening, she and Beckett ate dinner together in the dining room. The meal was simple but well prepared. Someone had cooked for him before she arrived, probably one of the ranch hands' wives from town. They sat at opposite ends of a table that could have seated 8, the distance between them feeling vast and appropriate. "How long have you had the ranch?" Brenna asked, if only to break the silence. "I inherited it when I was 19. My parents died within 6 months of each other. My father first, then my mother. I'm sorry, it was 15 years ago." His tone suggested the topic was closed. They finished the meal in silence. Afterward, Beckett retired to his office, and Brenna walked out onto the porch. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The land stretched out before her, dry but beautiful. Somewhere in the barn a horse whinnied. The sound of evening insects began to rise. She was married now. She had security. She had a roof and food, and the protection of a wealthy man's name. She'd gotten exactly what she'd come to Millstone for, so why did she feel so completely alone? The first week of marriage passed in a careful dance of distance. Brenna rose early each morning, prepared breakfast, and ate while Beckett reviewed paperwork in his office. She spent her days exploring the ranch, learning its rhythms and routines. The ranch hands watched her with curiosity, but said little. Gideon, the foreman, answered her questions with terse efficiency and made it clear that his loyalty belonged to Beckett. She cleaned the house thoroughly, finding neglected corners and dusty rooms that hadn't seen attention in months. The work was familiar and grounding. In the evenings, she and Beckett shared dinner in that same careful silence, then retreated to separate parts of the house. It was exactly what they'd agreed to, a practical arrangement with clear boundaries. On the 8th day, Judge Aldrich came to the ranch to finalize some property paperwork. Brenna served coffee in the sitting room, while the two men discussed legal details she only half listened to. When the judge left, he shook her hand and said, "Welcome to the community, Mrs. Drury." The name still felt strange in her mouth. That afternoon, Brenna was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard raised voices from the front porch. She set down the knife she'd been using to cut vegetables and moved quietly toward the front of the house. Through the window, she could see Beckett standing on the porch steps, facing a man on horseback. The visitor was roughly Beckett's age, dressed in worn work clothes. His face flushed with anger. "You know those terms weren't fair." "Drury," the man was saying, his voice carrying through the open window. "I had no choice but to sell at that price, and you knew it. You had a choice, Beckett replied, his tone cold and measured. You could have kept your cattle and watched them die of thirst when your water ran out. Instead, you sold them at market rate and got cash you needed. That's not exploitation, Mr. Slate. That's business. Vernon Slate. Brenna recognized the name, a neighboring rancher who ran a smaller operation to the east. She'd heard the ranch hands mention him. My water wouldn't have run out if you hadn't bought up all the rights to the best sources. Slate shot back. You've been strangling out the smaller ranches for years, buying up everything until folks like me have no options. I bought what was for sale. That's not illegal. Maybe not, but it sure as hell isn't right. Slate's horse shifted nervously beneath him. You've got enough, Drury, more than enough. But you keep taking. That's what kind of man you are. I don't explain my business decisions to people who can't manage their own affairs, Beckett said. You're done here, Slate. Get off my property. I'll go. But you remember this conversation when your turn comes. Nobody stays on top forever. Eventually, the people you've stepped on stop being grateful for whatever scraps you throw them. Slate wheeled his horse around and rode off at a gallop, leaving dust hanging in the air. Beckett stood on the porch for a long moment watching him go. Then he turned and came back inside, nearly running into Brenna in the hallway. You heard that, he said. It wasn't a question. I heard. Don't give it much thought. Slate's been bitter ever since he mismanaged his ranch into near bankruptcy. He wants someone to blame besides himself. Brenna chose her words carefully. Did you buy up water rights knowing it would force others to sell their cattle cheap? Beckett's expression hardened. I bought legal rights to water sources on my land and adjacent properties. What other ranchers choose to do with their herds isn't my concern. But you knew they'd have to sell. I knew they'd have to make difficult choices, just like everyone does in a drought year. That's not the same as forcing them. Brenna wanted to press further, but remembered their agreement. She wasn't supposed to interfere with his business. Still, the exchange sat uncomfortably in her chest. She'd known Beckett was a hard man, that he'd built his wealth through shrewd dealing. But hearing it play out, seeing the anger and desperation on Vernon Slate's face, it made the reality more immediate. I should get back to making supper, she said finally. Beckett nodded, already turning toward his office. Thank you. She returned to the kitchen, but found her hands less steady than before as she resumed cutting vegetables. The house felt different now, charged with something she couldn't quite name. She'd come here seeking security, accepting that it would come from a man who valued money over sentiment. But what exactly had she tied herself to? That evening at dinner, Brenna broke their usual silence. Was what he said true? About you buying up water rights? Beckett set down his fork and looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite anger, but close to it. I thought we agreed you wouldn't question my business. I'm not questioning it. I'm asking about it. There's a difference. Why does it matter to you? Because I'm your wife now. If people in town think you're taking advantage of your neighbors, that reflects on me too. He was quiet for a moment, considering this. I own water rights to 3 creek sources that run through my property and 2 adjacent parcels I purchased 5 years ago. Those rights are legal and documented. If other ranchers chose to rely on public sources that run dry in drought years, that's their lack of planning, not my fault. You could share the water. At what cost? I paid for those rights. Why should I give away what I bought fairly? Because your neighbors are struggling. Everyone struggles. That's life on the frontier. You of all people should understand that. She did understand it. She'd struggled alone for 10 years, never asking for help, never expecting mercy from the world. But she'd also never had the power to help others and chosen not to. Having the right to do something doesn't always make it right to do, she said quietly. Beckett's jaw tightened. I didn't marry you for moral lectures, Brenna. And I didn't marry you to sit silent while your choices affect the life I'm living now. They stared at each other across the table, the first real tension crackling between them. Finally, Beckett pushed back his chair and stood. I have work to do. He left the dining room, and Brenna heard his office door close with more force than necessary. She sat alone at the table, her appetite gone. The meal she'd carefully prepared sat half-eaten on both their plates. She'd known this arrangement would have complications, but she hadn't expected to care about Beckett's choices. She hadn't expected his business dealings to matter to her beyond their practical impact on her own security. The realization unsettled her. Later that night, unable to sleep, Brenna stood at her bedroom window and looked out over the dark ranch. A single lamp burned in the bunkhouse where the ranch hands slept. The barn was a shadow against the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She thought about Vernon Slate's face, the anger and helplessness she'd seen there. She thought about her brother, how he'd pushed everyone away rather than admit he needed help, how his pride had left him alone until the day he died. She thought about herself, how she'd run from vulnerability straight into an arrangement with a man whose heart seemed as closed as her brother's had been. Maybe she'd made a mistake. Maybe security wasn't enough if it came at the cost of being complicit in someone else's hardship. But she'd made a commitment, signed a contract. She would honor it. That was what she did. She kept her word, finished what she started, survived whatever came. That hadn't changed just because her husband's ethics troubled her. The next morning, Brenna came downstairs to find Beckett already gone. A note on the kitchen table said he'd ridden out early to check fence lines and wouldn't be back until evening. She was relieved not to face him yet, grateful for time to settle her thoughts. She spent the day working. She swept the porch, tended the small garden behind the house that had been neglected, and repaired a broken hinge on the chicken coop. The physical labor helped. It always did. In the afternoon, Gideon found her mending fence near the main pasture. He watched her work for a moment before speaking. "You know how to do that. I grew up fixing fences. Most women who marry into money don't spend their time doing ranch work. I'm not most women." Gideon made a sound that might have been approval. "Mr. Drury mentioned you two had words last night." Brenna hammered a nail into place before responding. "News travels fast. It's a small ranch. Sound carries." He shifted his weight, considering his next words. "Vernon Slate's not a bad man. Just desperate. His father lost half the ranch to bad gambling, and Vernon's been trying to rebuild ever since. Droughts hit him harder than most, and my husband's making it worse. Your husband's protecting his interests. Can't fault a man for that. Can't admire him for it either." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Drury's not cruel, but he learned early that weakness gets you destroyed out here. His parents taught him to be generous, and it cost them everything. He won't make that mistake." "What do you mean?" "Not my story to tell. But you married him without knowing much about him. Mrs. Drury. Might be worth asking him about his past before judging his present." The foreman walked away, leaving Brenna with the fence and her thoughts. She finished the repair work, then headed back to the house to prepare supper. Her hands were sore and dirty, satisfying evidence of useful work done. When Beckett returned that evening, he looked tired. He washed up and came to dinner without meeting her eyes. They ate in silence again, but this time it felt different, weighted with things unsaid rather than comfortably empty. Finally, Brenna spoke. "Gideon said your parents were generous people." Beckett's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. "He talks too much. He didn't tell me anything except that they taught you differently than you live now." Beckett was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. "My parents believed in helping their neighbors. They shared water, lent money they never got back, gave away cattle to families that were struggling. They were good people, Christian people." He said the words like they tasted bitter. "And when a drought came, not even as bad as this one, they had nothing left to sustain themselves. They'd given it all away. They lost the ranch. My father died of a heart attack 6 months later, and my mother followed him before the year was out. I inherited debt and a property that was half the size it had been." Brenna listened without interrupting. "I rebuilt it," Beckett continued. "I bought back every acre they lost and then some. I learned to make hard decisions and not apologize for them. I learned that sentiment doesn't keep you alive in this business. That's what my parents' generosity taught me, how to fail, or it taught you how much they valued something besides money. And what good did that do them? They're dead, and I'm the one who had to clean up the consequences of their kindness." Brenna set down her fork. "I'm not trying to change you, Beckett. I just want to understand what I've married into. You've married into security. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" "Yes, Then that's what you have. The rest, my business, my choices, that's not part of our arrangement. She could have argued, could have pushed back against the walls he was putting up. But she recognized something in his defensiveness, something she'd seen in her brother and in herself. The instinct to protect vulnerability by pretending it didn't exist. "All right," she said simply. He looked almost surprised by her capitulation. They finished the meal in silence, and afterward Beckett went to his office as usual. Brenna cleaned the kitchen and then went outside to sit on the porch. The evening air was warm and dry. The grass in the pasture rustled in the breeze, already going brittle from lack of rain. She'd learned something important tonight. Beckett Drury wasn't simply cold or greedy. He was afraid. Afraid of ending up like his parents, afraid of weakness, afraid of loss. His hardness was armor, just like her own careful distance had always been. The question was whether two people armored against the world could ever find a way to be honest with each other. She didn't have an answer yet, but she was beginning to suspect that the arrangement she'd thought was so simple was going to be far more complicated than either of them had planned. The tension between them eased in the days that followed, not through conversation but through routine. Brenna stopped questioning Beckett's business, and he stopped treating her presence like an intrusion. They existed in parallel, sharing space without sharing much else, but Brenna couldn't sit idle. She'd never been the kind of woman who stayed inside when there was work to be done. On the 10th morning of her marriage, she rose before dawn and walked down to the barn. The ranch hands were already there, preparing for the day's work. They fell silent when she entered, watching her with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical. "Morning," she said to the group. "I'm here to help." One of the younger hands, a boy who couldn't have been more than 19, glanced at the others before speaking. "Help with what, ma'am?" "Whatever needs doing. I grew up working ranches and mountain camps. I can handle myself." Gideon emerged from one of the stalls, carrying a saddle. He looked her over, her worn work pants, her sturdy boots, her hair tied back in a practical braid. "Mr. Drury know you're out here?" "Mr. Drury hired you to manage the ranch work. I'm offering to assist." A slight smile crossed Gideon's weathered face. "Stalls need mucking. You up for that?" "Point me to a shovel." She worked through the morning alongside the ranch hands, mucking stalls and hauling hay. The work was hard and familiar, the kind that made muscles ache and hands blister. She didn't complain or slow down. By mid-morning, she'd earned cautious nods from several of the men. During a water break, one of them, a middle-aged hand named Russell, asked where she'd learned to work like that. "Montana mountains," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "My brother ran a trading post and trap lines. If you wanted to eat, you worked. You any good with horses?" "Good enough," Russell gestured toward the corral where a young mare was pacing nervously. "That one's been giving us trouble. Won't let anyone get close enough to work with her proper. Boss bought her cheap because of her temperament." Brenna walked over to the corral and leaned on the fence, watching the mare. The horse was beautiful. Chestnut coat, strong legs, intelligent eyes. But she held her head high and her ears back, every line of her body saying she didn't trust humans. "She been mistreated?" Brenna asked. "Previous owner was rough with her," Russell said. "Broke her spirit some, but not enough. Now she's just mean." Brenna climbed over the fence and stood still in the corral, not approaching the mare, but not leaving either. The horse watched her with wary eyes. Brenna waited. After several minutes, the mare took a few steps closer, then stopped. Brenna remained motionless. "You gonna stand there all day?" One of the hands called out. "If that's what it takes," Brenna replied without moving. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The mare circled the corral twice, always keeping distance between them. But gradually her ears relaxed. Her head lowered slightly. Finally, she approached within a few feet and stood there considering. Brenna spoke softly, not looking directly at the horse. "Nobody's going to hurt you here. You're safe now?" The mare snorted but didn't back away. Slowly Brenna extended her hand. The horse stretched her neck, sniffed, then allowed Brenna to touch her muzzle. It was the smallest gesture, but the ranch hands watching let out impressed murmurs. "Well, I'll be damned," Russell said. Brenna spent another hour with the mare, gradually getting the horse comfortable with her presence. By the time she left the corral, the mare was following her around like a curious puppy. "You've got a gift," Gideon said, approaching. "That horse hasn't let anyone near her in 3 weeks. Just patience. Animals respond to calm. Still, not many people have it." He paused. "You're welcome out here any time, Mrs. Drury. The men could use the help, and you clearly know what you're doing." The acceptance felt good. Better than Brenna wanted to admit. She returned to the house to wash up and prepare lunch, but her mind was already planning what work she'd tackle the next day. That afternoon, she was in the kitchen when she heard the sound of gunfire. She grabbed the Winchester rifle she'd brought from her saddlebag, always kept loaded and within reach, and ran outside. Near the far pasture, she could see Beckett and 2 ranch hands standing near the fence line. A pack of coyotes had been harassing the cattle. Brenna raised her rifle and sighted down the barrel. The distance was considerable, but she'd grown up shooting game in mountain terrain. She fired 3 quick shots. 2 coyotes dropped, and the third fled into the brush. The cattle settled, and the men turned to see where the shots had come from. Beckett stared at her across the distance, his expression unreadable. Brenna lowered the rifle and walked back to the house. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Beckett approaching. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked. "Montana." "You hunt to eat or you go hungry?" Those were difficult shots. "Not particularly." She started to turn away, then stopped. "Your cattle are safe now. Thank you." The words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised her. "That was helpful. That's what I'm here for. To be useful." He studied her face for a moment, and Brenna saw something shift in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a recognition of her competence. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "Neither are you." That evening at dinner, the silence between them felt less empty. Beckett asked about her day, and she told him about working with the mare. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "Gideon mentioned you impressed the hands. That's not easy to do. I don't care about impressing them. I care about being useful. Why?" "Our arrangement doesn't require you to do ranch work," Brenna considered the question. "I've never been good at sitting still, and I don't like being useless. If I'm going to be here, I might as well contribute. Most women in your position would focus on the house and social obligations. I'm not most women." "No," Beckett said quietly. "You're not." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her. Brenna felt something warm flicker in her chest, but pushed it down. This was still an arrangement, still a transaction. Noticing that her husband had finally acknowledged her worth wasn't the same as caring about his opinion, but it felt dangerously close. Over the following days, Brenna established a routine. Mornings she worked with the ranch hands, mending fences, tending livestock, managing the difficult mare who was slowly becoming gentle under her care. Afternoons she handled household tasks and prepared meals. Evenings she and Beckett ate together, their conversations gradually extending beyond pleasantries. She learned that he rose at 5 every morning to review accounts, that he preferred coffee black and strong, that he had a habit of standing at his office window when he was thinking through a problem. Small details that painted a more complete picture of the man she'd married. He learned that she was most comfortable outdoors, that she had a dry sense of humor that emerged when she wasn't guarding herself, that she could outwork any man on his ranch without breaking a sweat. He began seeking her opinion on small matters, whether to repair a section of fence or replace it entirely, which feed supplier offered better quality. The ranch hands started calling her Mrs. Drury with genuine respect rather than just formality. Russell asked her advice on training a green horse. Even Gideon, who'd been skeptical at first, began deferring to her judgment on matters involving livestock. But in town, the reception was different. When Brenna accompanied Beckett to the general store one afternoon, she felt the weight of curious and judgmental stares. Women whispered behind their hands. Men tipped their hats politely, but with obvious questions in their eyes. Mrs. Galloway was the only one who greeted her warmly. "It's good to see you, dear. How are you settling in?" "Well enough," Brenna said. "I've heard interesting things. They say you work alongside the ranch hands." "I do." "That's unusual." Brenna met the older woman's eyes. I've never been conventional. Mrs. Galloway smiled. No, I don't imagine you have. Well, Millstone could use a little unconventional. Most of us are set in our ways. She leaned in closer. How is married life treating you? It's practical, which is what I wanted. Practical. Mrs. Galloway repeated the word thoughtfully. Well, sometimes practical turns into something more given time. You never know. Brenna didn't respond to that. She purchased flour and coffee while Beckett handled business with the shopkeeper. On the ride back to the ranch, she asked him about the stairs. They're curious, Beckett said. Our marriage was sudden, and you're not what they expected. What did they expect? Someone more conventional. Someone from town, probably. Not a mountain woman who outworks my ranch hands. Does it bother you? No, he glanced at her. Does it bother you? I've never cared much what people think. Good. Neither have I. That night, Brenna stood at her bedroom window again, looking out over the ranch. The mare she'd been working with, she'd started calling her Copper for her coat, stood peacefully in the corral. The land stretched out under starlight, dry but still holding its beauty. She'd been at the ranch for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of work and routine and carefully maintained distance from her husband. 3 weeks of feeling useful and valued for her skills, even if nothing else. It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship yet, but it was something. A foundation being built board by board, fence post by fence post, shared meal by shared meal. And for the first time since she'd ridden into Millstone with empty pockets and a calculated plan, Brenna wondered if maybe she'd found something more valuable than security. She just wasn't ready to name it yet. The drought worsened. What had been a concern became a crisis as July burned into August. The grass in the pastures turned from yellow to brown. The creek that ran through Drury land slowed to a trickle in places and dried up entirely in others. Cattle grew restless and lean. Brenna noticed Beckett spending longer hours in his office, poring over a leather-bound ledger that seemed to contain his entire world. She'd glimpse him through the doorway, bent over the pages, his face tight with concentration. The ledger was always with him, at meals, during ranch tours, even when he sat on the porch in the evening. One morning, she found him at the dining table earlier than usual. The ledger open beside his breakfast plate. He was making notes in the margin, his coffee forgotten and going cold. You're up early, she said, pouring herself coffee from the pot. Couldn't sleep. Too much to calculate. Brenna sat down across from him. The drought? The drought. Cattle prices, water rights, operating costs. Everything connects to everything else. He rubbed his eyes, looking more tired than she'd seen him. 3 neighboring ranchers have approached me in the past week about buying water access. They're desperate. What did you tell them? I gave them prices. Fair prices. Beckett looked up at her, and she saw defensiveness flash across his face. Market prices. Supply and demand. When water's scarce, the price goes up, even for neighbors who are struggling. Especially then. That's when the value is highest. He closed the ledger with more force than necessary. I know what you're thinking. That I'm taking advantage. But I paid for those water rights. I invested in infrastructure. Why should I give away what cost me money to acquire? Brenna sipped her coffee, choosing her words carefully. I'm not saying you should give it away. I'm asking if there's a difference between fair profit and excessive profit. There's a difference between business and charity. I learned that lesson the hard way, from your parents. Yes, from my parents. He stood abruptly, gathering his papers. I have work to do. She let him go without argument. But the conversation stayed with her as she went about her morning tasks. She understood his position, understood the fear that drove it. But understanding didn't mean agreeing. That afternoon, while Brenna was working in the barn, a wagon pulled up to the main house. She recognized the driver as Vernon Slate, the rancher who'd confronted Beckett weeks earlier. But this time, a woman sat beside him. His wife, Brenna assumed, and 2 children huddled in the wagon bed. Brenna wiped her hands on her pants and walked toward them. Slate saw her and climbed down from the wagon, his shoulders hunched in a way that spoke of defeated pride. Mrs. Drury, he said, removing his hat, I was hoping to speak with your husband. He's in his office. I can fetch him if you... Actually, Slate interrupted. "I was hoping to speak with you first." Brenna glanced at the woman in the wagon. She looked worn down, her dress faded and patched, her face showing the strain of too many hard months. The children were thin, their eyes too large in their faces. "What can I do for you?" Brenna asked. Slate twisted his hat in his hands. "I've come to ask for help. Not for me, for my family. My cattle are dying. I can't afford your husband's prices for water, and the public creeks run dry. If I don't get water soon, I'll lose everything. You should talk to Beckett about that. I tried. He won't budge on price, and I can't pay what he's asking." Slate's voice cracked slightly. "I heard you're a fair woman, Mrs. Drury, that you work the ranch yourself, that you understand what it means to struggle. I'm asking you, woman to woman, human to human, is there anything you can do? Anything at all?" Brenna looked at Mrs. Slate again. The woman's eyes met hers, and in them Brenna saw something she recognized, the same desperate determination she'd felt riding into Millstone with nothing but a plan to survive. "Wait here," Brenna said. She went into the house and knocked on Beckett's office door. He called for her to enter, and she found him hunched over his ledger again. "Vernon Slate's here with his family," she said. "They're asking for help." Beckett's jaw tightened. "I've already told him my terms. He can't meet them. His cattle are dying. Then he should sell what he has left and move on. That's business, Brenna. That's a family. Those are children out there who look like they haven't had a full meal in weeks. That's not my responsibility. Then whose is it?" She kept her voice level but firm. "You have water. You have more than you need. They're your neighbors. Neighbors who'd let me fail if our positions were reversed. You don't know that. I know that when my parents needed help, when they'd given everything to the community, those same neighbors stood by and watched us lose everything. Nobody came to their rescue. Nobody offered them water or money or anything else. They died because they were too generous, and the world took advantage of it." The pain in his voice was raw and real. Brenna softened slightly. "That was wrong. What happened to your parents was wrong. But taking revenge on different people for old wounds doesn't make it right. I'm not taking revenge. I'm protecting what's mine. At what cost? At whatever cost is necessary to keep from ending up like them." They stared at each other across the desk, locked in a conflict neither of them wanted but couldn't avoid. Finally, Brenna spoke quietly. "I married you for security. I'm grateful for that. But I didn't marry you to watch families suffer when help was possible. That's not the kind of person I want to be." "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying I have my own money. Not much, but some. I could offer the Slates water from my own funds if you won't from yours." Beckett stood up slowly, his face darkening. "You will not undermine my business decisions." "I'm not. I'm making my own. Using resources I'm providing, using money I earned before I ever met you. Money I've kept separate, just in case." She hadn't meant to reveal that, but the words were out now. Something flickered across Beckett's face. Hurt, maybe, or the realization that she'd kept an escape route open. Just in case what? In case our arrangement didn't work out? In case I needed it? I've learned to protect myself. So have I. He sat back down and returned his attention to his ledger, effectively dismissing her. "Do what you want with your money, Brenna, but don't expect me to follow your example." She left the office and went back outside, where the Slates were still waiting. She approached the wagon and spoke to Vernon. "I can't change my husband's prices," she said, "but I have my own resources. I can sell you water at cost, just enough to cover the actual expense of drawing and transporting it. It won't be free, but it'll be what you can afford." Vernon's face transformed with relief and gratitude. "Mrs. Drury, I thank you. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just take care of your family." She arranged the details with him, calculating prices that would help without completely depleting her savings. As the wagon pulled away, Mrs. Slate turned back and raised a hand in thanks. Brenna returned the gesture. When she turned around, she saw Beckett standing on the porch, watching. Their eyes met across the distance. He didn't smile or nod. He simply looked at her for a long moment, then went back inside. That night, he didn't come to dinner. Brenna ate alone, then found him still in his office after dark. She knocked but didn't wait for permission to enter. "I made beef stew," she said. "I can bring you a plate." "I'm not hungry." "Beckett, you went against my wishes today. I used my own money to make my own choice, under my roof, using my resources I helped maintain. I worked this ranch as hard as any of your hands, maybe harder." She moved into the room and sat in the chair across from his desk. "I'm not trying to undermine you, but I can't stand by and do nothing when I have the power to help. That's what my mother said." His voice was bitter. "Right up until we had nothing left. I'm not your mother, and you're not your father. We can make different choices." "How?" "By giving away everything until we're vulnerable too. By finding a balance. By being strong enough to help when we can, without destroying ourselves." She leaned forward. "You asked me once why I came to Millstone. I told you I needed security. That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. What's the rest? My brother raised me after our parents died. He was hard on me because he thought that's what I needed to survive. He pushed everyone away, never asked for help, never showed weakness. And you know what happened? He died alone in a mining accident, and nobody found him for 3 days. I'd left years before because I couldn't stand his coldness anymore." The last words we said to each other were in anger. Her voice caught slightly, and she paused to steady it. "I got a letter from the mining company after he died. They found a letter he'd written me but never sent. It said he was sorry, that he'd been wrong to push me away, that he wanted me to come home." She met Beckett's eyes. "But by the time I got that letter, it was too late. He was already gone." Beckett was silent, his expression unreadable. "I came here seeking security," Brenna continued, "but also running from what my brother's life taught me, that protecting yourself at all costs means dying alone. I don't want that for either of us, so what do you want?" "I want to honor our arrangement. I want to respect your right to run your business as you see fit. But I also want the right to be the person I can live with being. That means helping when I can. Does that make sense?" Beckett looked down at his ledger, at the columns of numbers and calculations that had consumed him for weeks. When he looked up again, his face was weary. "I don't know how to do what you're suggesting, how to be strong and generous at the same time." "Neither do I," Brenna admitted. "But maybe we could figure it out together." He didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched between them, filled with things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, he closed the ledger and stood up. "I'll have some of that stew," he said quietly. They walked to the kitchen together. Brenna heated the food while Beckett sat at the table, looking more human and less like a fortress than she'd seen him. When she set the bowl in front of him, he took her hand briefly. "Thank you," he said, "for helping the slates. And he seemed to struggle with the words, for telling me about your brother." "You're welcome." They ate together in a different kind of silence than usual. Not empty or careful, but comfortable. The beginning of something that felt almost like trust. After dinner, Beckett walked out onto the porch, and Brenna followed. They stood side by side, looking out at the darkened land. "The drought's getting worse," he said. "I know. More people are going to come asking for help. Yes, I'm not sure I can be what they need me to be." Brenna looked at his profile, seeing the fear and stubbornness and buried pain that made him who he was. "You don't have to be anything but honest. That's all anyone can ask." He turned to look at her, and in the dim light from the house, she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not affection exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement that they were both damaged people trying to survive in a world that didn't care about their scars. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. It was the first truly personal thing he'd said to her since they married. Brenna felt warmth bloom in her chest, dangerous and unwelcome and undeniable. "So am I," she replied. They stood there together as the night deepened around them. Two people learning slowly that survival might not be enough, and that the security they'd both sought might look different than either of them had imagined. The photograph appeared in Brenna's hands by accident. She'd been cleaning Beckett's office, something she did once a week, despite his protests that he could manage his own space. While dusting the shelves behind his desk, she'd knocked a ledger off balance, and when she caught it, an old photograph slipped from between its pages and fluttered to the floor. She picked it up. intending to simply return it to wherever it had come from. But the image stopped her. It showed a younger Beckett, maybe 15 or 16 years old, standing between two people who had to be his parents. They were on the front porch of this very house, and the difference was startling. Young Beckett was smiling, genuinely smiling, with warmth in his eyes that she'd never seen in the man she'd married. His father had an arm around his shoulders, a tall man with kind eyes and a work-worn face. His mother stood on Beckett's other side, small and sturdy, her hand resting on her son's arm, with obvious affection. What struck Brenna most was how open they all looked, how unguarded, like they had no idea that hardship was coming, that their generosity would cost them everything, that the boy in the photograph would grow into a man who protected himself by feeling nothing. She heard footsteps in the hall and quickly tried to return the photograph to the ledger. But Beckett appeared in the doorway before she could. "What are you doing?" His eyes went immediately to the photograph in her hands, and his expression closed down. "That's private. I'm sorry. It fell out while I was dusting." "I wasn't snooping." She held it out to him. He took it but didn't look at it, just held it in his hand like it was something that might burn him. "I'd prefer if you didn't clean my office. I was trying to help, I know. But some spaces should remain private." Brenna nodded and moved toward the door, but something made her stop. "They look like good people." "Your parents?" Beckett was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then he said quietly, "They were. You look happy there. I was young. I didn't know any better. Or maybe you knew something you've forgotten since." She risked a glance back at him. "What were their names?" He looked at the photograph then, really looked at it, and his face softened almost imperceptibly. "Thomas and Margaret. My father ran cattle, and my mother kept bees. She'd sell honey in town." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She'd give half of it away to families who couldn't afford it. Dad used to joke that she'd make them rich if she'd just charge proper prices, but he loved her for it anyway. He did. They were—" He paused, searching for words. "They were good to each other, kind. They believed the best way to live was to help others. That doesn't sound like a bad philosophy. It's a philosophy that gets you killed out here." The hardness returned to his voice. "They helped everyone, lent money they never got back, shed water and land and resources, and when the drought came, a bad one worse than this, they had nothing left for themselves. Neighbors they'd helped for years stood by and watched them fail. Some even bought our land for pennies on the dollar when we couldn't pay debts. My father worked himself to death trying to rebuild, and my mother just faded. Like she couldn't live in a world that had proven her wrong about human nature. Brenna absorbed this, understanding him better than she had before. "So you decided never to be like them." "I decided never to be that vulnerable. Yes, even if it means living the way you do. Alone, even when you're surrounded by people." His jaw tightened. "I'm not alone. I have the ranch, the business, things." "You have things. But do you have anyone who really knows you?" "I have Gideon, your employee. He's loyal because you pay him." Brenna moved closer, her voice gentle. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Beckett. I'm trying to understand, because the man in that photograph, he looks like someone who knew how to be happy. And I don't think you've been happy in a very long time. Happiness is a luxury I can't afford, or won't allow yourself." He set the photograph down on his desk with careful precision, like he was afraid it might shatter. "Why does this matter to you?" "Because we're married. Because I live here now, and your walls affect both of us." She took a breath. "And because I see something in you that reminds me of my brother. He built walls too, pushed everyone away to protect himself, and he died alone because of it. I'm not your brother." "No, but you're heading down the same path." She gestured to the photograph. "The boy in that picture knew something, the man. You became as forgotten, that protecting yourself completely means cutting yourself off from everything that makes life worth living." Beckett looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You think I need saving. I think we both do. That's why we ended up here together." Before he could respond, voices from outside interrupted them. Through the window, Brenna could see riders approaching, several of them led by Vernon Slate. But this time he wasn't alone. At least 5 other ranchers rode with him. Beckett moved to the window, his body tensing. This looks like trouble. They walked out onto the porch together. The riders pulled up in front of the house, and Vernon dismounted. His expression was apologetic but determined. "Mr. Drury, Mrs. Drury, I'm sorry to come at you like this, but we need to talk." "About what?" Beckett's tone was neutral, but Brenna felt him preparing for confrontation. Water, the drought. The fact that half the ranches in this valley are going to fail if something doesn't change. Vernon gestured to the men behind him. "We're not here to threaten or demand. We're here to ask, neighbor to neighbor, if there's any way we can work something out." Another rancher spoke up, an older man Brenna recognized from town. His name was Harrison Webb, and he ran one of the larger operations in the area. "Your water rights give you control of most of the reliable sources around here, Drury. You got every legal right to charge whatever you want. But we're asking you to consider that we're all in this together. If the smaller ranches fail, it affects everyone. Less business in town, fewer hands available for hire, a weakened community overall." Beckett crossed his arms. "I've offered water at fair market prices to anyone who wants to buy." "Fair market?" Vernon's voice rose slightly. "You're charging 3 times what water costs in normal years. That's not fair. That's exploitation. That's supply and demand. Water's scarce. The price reflects that. The price reflects that you've got us over a barrel," Webb said. "And you know it." Brenna touched Beckett's arm lightly, and he glanced at her. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the instinct to defend his position warring with something else. Something her words might have planted. "What exactly are you proposing?" Beckett asked, his tone slightly less hostile. Vernon exchanged looks with the other ranchers. "We're proposing a consortium. Pool our resources, share water access based on need, rather than who can pay most. Everyone contributes what they can, money, labor, resources. We work together to get through this drought instead of fighting each other. That sounds like charity. It sounds like survival," Webb said. "For all of us, including you. Because if the smaller ranches fail, who's going to buy your cattle? Who's going to work your land when you need extra hands? A healthy community benefits everyone." Beckett was quiet, thinking. Brenna could see him calculating, running numbers in his head, weighing risks and benefits. She also saw something else: fear. Fear of making his parents' mistake. Fear of being generous and ending up destroyed because of it. "I need time to consider this," he said finally. "Time's something we don't have much of," Vernon said. "The creek's almost dry. Cattle are dying. If we don't act soon—" "I said I need time." Beckett's voice was firm. "Give me 3 days to review the proposal properly. I'll give you an answer then." The ranchers weren't happy, but they agreed. As they rode away, Brenna and Beckett stood on the porch watching them go. "You're actually considering it," she said. "It wasn't quite a question. I'm considering not being the villain of this story." He looked at her. "That's what I am to them, isn't it? The rich man keeping water from his neighbors while they suffer. You're a man protecting what he's built. But maybe there's a way to protect it without refusing to help. Or maybe there's no way to do both. Maybe that's the choice. Be strong or be kind. Your parents managed both for a long time, until it killed them. The drought killed them. The circumstances killed them. Not their kindness." He shook his head, frustrated. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple. But it might be right." That evening, Beckett shut himself in his office with his ledgers and didn't emerge for dinner. Brenna left a plate outside his door and went to bed, knowing he needed space to work through whatever he was feeling. But in the middle of the night, she woke to the sound of movement downstairs. She pulled on a robe and descended to find Beckett in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a glass of whiskey and his father's photograph laid out in front of him. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. He looked up, startled, then gestured to the chair across from him. "Join me." She sat down. They were quiet for a moment, the house settling around them with small creaks and sighs. "I've been going through my father's old records," Beckett said finally, "looking at how he ran things before I took over. Do you know what I found?" "What?" "He made money. Not as much as I do, but enough. The ranch was profitable. His generosity didn't destroy him. The drought destroyed him because he'd already given away his reserves. If he'd kept just a little more back, just protected himself a little more, they might have survived. So you're saying he was foolish? I'm saying he didn't balance it right. He gave too much. Beckett took a drink. But I went the opposite direction. I give nothing. And you're right, I'm alone because of it. Brenna reached across the table and touched the photograph. They look happy here. They were. Right up until they weren't. He met her eyes. I don't want to end up like them, Brenna. But I also don't want to end up like I am now. So where does that leave me? Maybe somewhere in the middle. Maybe being strong enough to help without destroying yourself. Building something that lasts, not because you held onto it with both fists, but because you built it with others. That sounds like hope. Is that such a bad thing? He was quiet, considering. Then he picked up the photograph and studied it in the lamplight. My mother used to say that a community was only as strong as its weakest member. That if you didn't look out for each other, you'd all fall. She sounds wise. She was. Just not practical. He set the photograph down. But maybe there's a way to be both. Brenna squeezed his hand across the table. 3 days. Think about it carefully. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Even if I say no to the consortium, even then. Because it's your choice to make. She stood to leave, then paused. But I hope you'll choose differently than fear would tell you to. As she climbed the stairs back to her room, she heard him moving around the kitchen. The sound of him pouring another drink. The rustle of papers. Working through the hardest decision he'd probably faced since his parents died, and hoping, she realized with a surprise, that he'd find the courage to choose connection over safety, because somewhere along the way, his choice had started to matter to her. Not just for what it meant for her security, but for what it meant for him, for the man he could be if he'd let himself try. Something shifted between them after that night. The change was subtle. Small gestures and moments that accumulated like snowfall, quiet but transformative. Beckett began joining Brenna in the mornings, not just for breakfast, but to help with chores. He'd work alongside her in companionable silence, mending fence or checking on livestock. They developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's movements, working as a unit rather than two separate people occupying the same space. At meals, their conversations extended beyond practicalities. Beckett asked about her life in the mountains, and Brenna found herself sharing stories she'd kept buried for years. About teaching herself to read from an old Bible her mother had left behind. About the first deer she'd ever tracked and killed. How she'd cried even as she field-dressed it because she'd never taken a life before. About winter nights so cold she'd sleep with her horse for warmth. In return, Beckett talked about his childhood before tragedy struck. His father teaching him to rope cattle, his mother's honey cakes that the whole town would line up to buy, the way the ranch had felt like a kingdom when he was young, full of possibility and promise. These conversations happened in fragments, pieces offered carefully and accepted with equal care. They were learning each other, Brenna realized. Not the surface details, but the deeper currents that had shaped them into who they'd become. One afternoon, Beckett surprised her by asking her to ride into town with him. "I have business at the bank," he said. "But afterward I thought we might, I don't know, walk around together." It was perhaps the most uncertain she'd ever seen him, and it touched something in her chest. "I'd like that." In town, people noticed them walking side by side. Beckett kept a respectable distance, but there was something in the way he shortened his stride to match hers, in the way he guided her around a muddy patch in the road with a light touch on her elbow. They looked, Brenna supposed, like an actual married couple. Mrs. Galloway spotted them from her porch and waved them over. "It's good to see you two together," she said warmly. "How are things at the ranch?" "Well enough," Beckett said, "though the drought's making everything difficult." "It's making things difficult for everyone." Mrs. Galloway's expression grew serious. "Vernon Slate was in yesterday buying supplies on credit. He looked worn down to nothing. His wife, too. I worry about that family." Brenna saw Beckett's jaw tighten slightly. They came to me with others, proposing some kind of consortium. I heard about that. Smart idea, if you ask me. Nobody can weather this alone. That's what they're hoping I'll believe. Mrs. Galloway studied him with the frankness of someone who'd known him since childhood. Beckett Drury, I knew your parents. Good people, both of them. Your mother was my dearest friend. I watched what happened to them, and I watched what it did to you. But you've been punishing yourself and everyone around you for their mistakes long enough. With respect, Mrs. Galloway. No respect needed. I'm old enough to speak plain. She looked between Beckett and Brenna. You've got a good woman here. One who works hard and doesn't expect the world from you. That's rare. And you've got an opportunity to do something your father would be proud of. Not the same thing he did, but something that honors what he believed in while being smarter about it. Beckett didn't respond, but Brenna saw something flicker across his face. They said their goodbyes and continued walking. Near the general store, they encountered Harrison Webb loading supplies into his wagon. He nodded to them both, his expression neutral. Mr. Drury, Mrs. Drury. Webb, Beckett acknowledged. Still thinking about that consortium proposal? I am. Fair enough. Just wanted you to know I've been talking to the other ranchers. We're willing to put up fair collateral, have everything legally documented. This wouldn't be charity, it would be business, just fairer business than what we've got now. I'll keep that in mind. After Webb drove off, Beckett was quiet. Brenna could see him processing, calculating, weighing options. When they reached the edge of town, he stopped and looked back at the collection of buildings and people that made up Millstone. I don't know how to trust them, he said quietly. All of them. The same people who stood by while my parents lost everything now want my help. Maybe they learned something too. Maybe watching what happened to your family taught them that community matters. Or maybe they're just desperate enough to pretend it does. Beckett. She touched his arm, and he turned to look at her. You can't live your whole life waiting for people to betray you. That's not living, it's just surviving. Surviving is what I'm good at. Is it enough, though? Is it what you want? He didn't answer, but she saw something shift in his expression. They rode back to the ranch in thoughtful silence. That evening, Gideon found Brenna in the barn. She was brushing down Copper, the mare who'd become her special project. The horse was almost completely tame now, responding to Brenna's voice and touch with trust. You've got a gift with her, Gideon said, leaning against the stall door. Never seen anyone gentle a horse quite like you do. Just patience. It's more than that. It's understanding what she needs. He paused. Same way you understand what Mr. Drury needs, I think. Brenna glanced at him. What makes you say that? I've worked for this family for 20 years. Watched that boy grow into a hard man. Thought that's all he'd ever be. But since you came... Gideon shook his head. I've seen him smile more in 2 months than in the past 10 years. Seen him second-guess himself, which used to be impossible. You're changing him. I'm not trying to change him. Maybe that's why it's working. Nah, the foreman studied her. You planning to stay? For real, I mean, not just because of your arrangement. It was a bold question, but Gideon had earned the right to ask it. Brenna considered her answer carefully. I don't know. I came here for security. That was the deal. But things have gotten complicated. Complicated how? I'm starting to care. About the ranch. About whether Beckett makes the right choice with this consortium. About... She stopped, not quite ready to finish that thought. About him. Gideon finished for her. You're starting to care about him. Brenna didn't deny it. That wasn't part of the plan. Best things rarely are. Gideon straightened up. For what it's worth, I think he's starting to care about you, too. Man doesn't look at a woman the way he looks at you if there's nothing there. After Gideon left, Brenna stayed in the barn, thinking. She finished with Copper and then walked out into the evening air. The ranch spread out around her, dry and struggling, but still beautiful. The house stood solid against the darkening sky, warm light glowing from the windows. This place had become home. Not just a roof and security, but home in a way she hadn't felt since her parents died. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. She found Beckett on the porch, the place where they'd shared so many quiet evenings. He had papers spread out on the small table beside him. Financial projections, water calculations, legal documents. "Working late?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Trying to figure out if I can make the consortium work without destroying everything I've built. And I think I can, if I'm careful, if I structure it right." He looked at her. "But it requires trusting people I don't trust, putting faith in a community that failed my family, or giving them a chance to be better than they were." He gathered his papers and set them aside. "Tell me about your brother, the real story, not just the parts you've shared before." Brenna was surprised by the request, but recognized it for what it was, an exchange. He was considering opening himself to risk, and he wanted to understand what had shaped her own relationship with trust. "His name was Daniel," she began. 7 years older than me. When our parents died, he was 17 and I was 10. The county wanted to split us up, send me to a family in town, but he fought to keep me. Took on full responsibility for raising me, even though he was barely more than a kid himself. That sounds like love. It was, but it was also fear. He'd lost so much already. Our parents, his childhood, any chance at a normal life. So he decided the only way to protect us was to need no one. We lived in the mountains, just the two of us. He taught me everything, hunting, trapping, survival, but he also taught me not to trust anyone, not to depend on anything but ourselves. What happened? I grew up, started seeing that his way of living wasn't strength. It was fear dressed up as independence. We fought about it. I told him I wanted more than just surviving. I wanted to live in a town, have friends, maybe find someone to build a life with. He said I was being weak, that I'd regret leaving the safety we'd built. She paused, the memory still painful. I left angry, told him he could live alone if that's what he wanted, but I wasn't going to die alone like him. But he didn't want to be alone. No. The letter I carry, the one I've never been able to read, was written 6 months after I left. It took another 4 months to reach me, traveling through trading posts and mail routes. By the time I got it, he was already dead. Mining accident. They said he'd been working alone, taking risks he shouldn't have taken. Maybe he was distracted. Maybe he was just tired of being careful all the time. I'll never know. Beckett reached across and took her hand. The gesture was simple but profound, the most direct comfort he'd offered her. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry too. Sorry I left angry. Sorry I never got to tell him I understood why he was the way he was, even if I couldn't live that way myself." She squeezed his hand. "That's why I notice when you're building walls. I've seen where that road ends." They sat together as darkness settled completely, hands still joined. After a while, Beckett spoke again. "The letter. Have you ever thought about reading it? Every day. But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of what it says. Of facing his regret when I can't do anything to change what happened. Of finally accepting that he's gone and I can't fix any of it. Maybe that's what you need, though, to face it, to let yourself grieve properly instead of carrying it like an open wound." She looked at him in the dim light. "Is that what you're doing? Grieving your parents properly by finally letting yourself feel something besides anger?" "Maybe, I don't know. This is all," he gestured helplessly. "I don't know how to do this. Any of it, feeling things, trusting people, being someone other than who I've been. Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together." He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that Brenna's breath caught. When he released her, they were both looking at each other with something new in their eyes. Something that had been building quietly all along, but was finally rising to the surface. "Brenna," he said softly, "this arrangement we made, I know. It's not what I thought it would be. I know," she repeated. "Me neither. I'm not sure what we do about that. We don't have to decide tonight. We just keep going, keep learning each other, keep trying to be better than our fears tell us we can be." He nodded slowly. "That sounds like hope again." "Maybe it is." They stayed on the porch until the air grew cool. When they finally went inside, Beckett walked her to her bedroom door and paused there, clearly wanting to say something, but not finding the words. Finally, he just said, "Good night, Brenna, good night." But as she closed the door and leaned against it, she knew that something fundamental had changed. They weren't just two strangers in an arrangement anymore. They were two people who'd seen each other's wounds and hadn't turned away, and that was more frightening and more precious than any security money could buy. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Thursday morning. Brenna found Beckett in his office at dawn, still in yesterday's clothes, surrounded by papers and ledgers. The lamp had burned low, and his eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. She knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. "Beckett," she stepped into the room. "Have you been up all night?" He didn't answer, just gestured to a stack of papers on his desk. Legal documents with official seals. Bank letterhead. Numbers that meant nothing to her until she looked closer and saw the word foreclosure repeated across multiple pages. "I don't understand," she said, picking up one of the documents. "What is this?" "The end of everything I've built." His voice was hollow. "The bank is calling in my loans. I have 6 weeks to pay them in full, or they take the ranch." Brenna felt the floor shift beneath her. "How is that possible? You're wealthy." "Everyone knows that. Everyone knows what I've wanted them to know." He laughed bitterly. "The wealthy cattle broker with money to spare. The man who can afford to charge whatever he wants for water because he's so secure." "It's been a lie, Brenna. All of it. Explain it to me slowly from the beginning." Beckett rubbed his face with both hands. "When my parents died, I inherited debt along with the ranch. Substantial debt from their generosity and my father's attempts to save what they'd built. I was 19 years old, and I owed more money than the property was worth." He stood and moved to the window, unable to look at her. "So I borrowed more." "I took out loans to pay off the original debt and rebuild. Then I borrowed to expand, to buy water rights, to make myself look successful. Because I learned early that success attracts success. People trust you with their business if they think you're already wealthy. Banks lend you money more easily. You can negotiate from strength. So you created an illusion. I created a strategy. And it worked for years. I made enough to cover the loan payments and operating costs, plus a little extra. I was managing it. But then," he gestured helplessly, "the drought, cattle prices dropping, operating costs rising. And I've been using my resources to maintain appearances instead of building actual reserves. Just like my parents did, but in reverse. They gave everything away to help others. I held everything close to protect myself. Both paths led to the same place, failure." Brenna tried to process this information. "The water rights. The hard bargaining with your neighbors. You weren't being cruel for profit. You were desperate. I was trying to survive without anyone knowing I was barely hanging on. Because if people knew I was vulnerable, the whole house of cards would collapse. Banks would call in loans, business partners would demand immediate payment, other ranchers would see weakness." He finally turned to face her. "And my wife would know she'd married a fraud instead of the secure future she thought she was getting." The accusation in his voice stung, but Brenna understood it. He was hurt and afraid, lashing out at the easiest target. "When did you know?" she asked quietly. "That the bank was going to foreclose?" "I've known it was possible for months, but I thought I could work my way out of it. I always have before. I just needed time, and the drought—" He broke off. "The drought accelerated everything. I can't generate enough revenue to cover my obligations. The bank's been patient, but they've reached their limit. They want their money back, and I don't have it. How much do you need?" "More than I can possibly raise in 6 weeks. Even if I sold every head of cattle, every asset I have, it wouldn't be enough. Not in a drought when prices are at rock bottom." Brenna moved to his desk and began sorting through the papers, reading amounts, terms, conditions. The numbers were staggering. He wasn't exaggerating. This was catastrophic. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked. "When we first married. When I proposed the arrangement, because you wanted security. If I'd told you I was on the edge of losing everything, you would have walked away. And I—" He stopped, something crossing his face that looked like shame. I needed you. The bank required evidence of stability before they'd extend my loans again. A wife, a household, the appearance of settling down, it helped buy me time. The words hit her like a physical blow. So that's why you agreed to marry me. Not just for appearances, but because you needed it to keep the bank from foreclosing sooner. Partly. Yes. What else haven't you told me? We met her eyes then and she saw real pain there. That's all of it. I needed a wife to satisfy the bank's requirements. You needed security. It seemed like a fair exchange. But I never told you that my security was an illusion, and for that, I'm sorry. Brenna sat down heavily in one of the office chairs. Everything she'd built her new life on was crumbling. The security she'd sought, the stability she'd traded her freedom for, all of it resting on a foundation that was about to collapse. I should go, she said. You'll need to, I don't know, make arrangements. And I'll need to figure out where I'm going. Brenna, wait for what? You've made it clear what this marriage was, a business strategy that's failing. I have some money saved. I can start over somewhere else. Is that really what you want, to leave? She looked at him, at the man she'd started to care for despite her best intentions. What I want doesn't seem to matter much, does it? This whole thing was built on necessity and deception. I was deceiving myself about wanting just security, and you were deceiving me about having any to offer. They stared at each other across the wreckage of their carefully constructed arrangement. The silence was broken by Beckett's quiet voice. You're right. About all of it. But I need you to know. These past 2 months, getting to know you, working beside you, learning to... He struggled with the words. It stopped being just an arrangement for me. I know I have no right to ask you to stay, especially now. But I need you to know that what's happened between us was real for me. Maybe the only real thing in my life in a long time. Brenna felt tears, threatening, and pushed them back. She wouldn't cry. She'd survived worse than this. She could survive it again. I need time to think. Of course. She left the office and went up to her room, closing the door behind her. Her saddlebag still sat in the wardrobe, packed with her few possessions, just as it had been when she first arrived. She'd never fully unpacked, had she? Some part of her had always been ready to run if things fell apart. She pulled the bag out and sat on the bed, opening it. Her spare clothes, her tin cup, her hunting knife. And at the bottom, the letter. The one she'd carried for 10 years but never read. Her hands were shaking as she pulled it out. The paper was worn from handling. The seal broken long ago by someone else. She'd gotten it from the mining company manager, along with news of Daniel's death. Found this among his things, the man had said. Looks like he never sent it. Thought you should have it anyway. Brenna unfolded the letter and began to read. The handwriting was Daniel's, rough and unpolished, like the man himself. The words were simple but devastating. Dear Brenna, it began. I've been trying to write this letter for 6 months and haven't found the right words yet. I'm not good with words, as you know, but I need to say some things before more time passes. You were right when you left. Everything you said about me was true. I did push everyone away. I did mistake isolation for strength. I thought I was protecting us by teaching you not to need anyone, but all I did was make you as alone as I was. When you told me you wanted more from life, I should have said I understood. Instead, I called you weak and let you leave in anger. I've regretted it every day since. I've had time to think about why I was the way I was. After Mom and Dad died, I was so afraid of losing anyone else that I decided not to let anyone close. I thought if I controlled everything, if I needed nobody, I'd be safe from more pain. But what I actually did was guarantee I'd be alone. You leaving proved that. I want you to know that I'm proud of you for having the courage I never had, for choosing connection over safety, for believing that life should be more than just surviving. You were braver at 18 than I've been my whole life. If you get this letter, I hope you found what you were looking for. I hope you've built a life with people who matter, who you can trust, and who trust you. I hope you've learned to open your heart in ways I never could. And I hope someday you can forgive me for being too much of a coward to tell you all this while it mattered. I love you. I'm sorry. Come home if you want to, or build your home somewhere else. Either way, you have my blessing. You always did. Daniel, Brenna read it twice, then a third time, tears streaming down her face. All these years, she'd carried the weight of their final angry words. She'd believed her brother had died, thinking she was weak for wanting more than isolation. But he'd understood. He'd wanted her to find exactly what she'd been searching for. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come to Millstone seeking safety, security, the kind of protection that didn't require emotional risk. She'd found a man who wanted exactly the same thing. And together, they'd built an arrangement designed to keep them safe from the very thing Daniel's letter was urging her toward. Real connection. She sat on the bed holding the letter, understanding finally what she needed to do. Not what was safe or practical or protected, but what was right. What her brother hadn't been able to do but had wanted for her anyway. She found Beckett still in his office, staring at the foreclosure papers like they might change if he looked at them long enough. He glanced up when she entered, his expression guarded. "I read my brother's letter," she said without preamble. "The one I've been carrying for 10 years. Brenna, let me finish." She moved into the room and sat across from him. "He wrote to tell me he was sorry for pushing me away, for teaching me that needing people was weakness. He wanted me to find connection, to build a real life, to be braver than he'd been." She set the letter on his desk. "And I came here seeking the exact opposite. I came looking for security without vulnerability, safety without risk, all the things that kept my brother alone until the day he died." Beckett looked at the letter, then back at her. "I understand if you need to leave." "I'm not leaving." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. "I'm staying, but not because of our arrangement." "Then why?" "Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about security for me. It started being about you, about us, about building something real instead of just surviving." She leaned forward. "You said you don't have enough money to save the ranch. How much do you actually need?" "Brenna, you don't have to—" "How much?" He told her the number, and she did quick calculations in her head. "I have money saved, not enough to cover all of it, but enough to make a difference. If we combine what I have with what you can liquidate, and if we—" She paused, an idea forming. "If we approach this differently." "What do you mean?" "The consortium. The ranchers who came asking for help. What if instead of you selling them water, we create an actual partnership? They invest in the ranch by buying shares. We pool resources to get through the drought together, and everyone benefits if we succeed." Beckett shook his head. "Why would they invest in a failing operation?" "Because it's not failing, it's just over-leveraged. The land is good, the water rights are valuable, and you know how to run a successful cattle operation. You've just been trying to do it alone while servicing impossible debt. But with partners, with shared investment and shared risk, it could work," he finished quietly. "If they're willing. If they trust me enough after how I've treated them. There's only one way to find out." She stood and extended her hand. "But first, you need to know something. I'm not doing this to save our arrangement. I'm doing it because I choose to, because you matter to me. Because this," she gestured between them, "matters to me. Even if we lose the ranch, even if it all falls apart, I'm staying. We'll figure out what comes next together." He stood and took her hand, pulling her close. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," she said with a slight smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway. Why? Why would you tie yourself to someone who lied to you, who's about to lose everything?" "Because I've learned something these past 2 months. Security isn't about having money or land or guarantees. It's about having someone who sees you completely, flaws and fears and failures, and chooses to stand with you anyway. You've seen all of me, Beckett, the parts I tried to hide. And you didn't run, neither did you, so we're both fools, I guess." She squeezed his hand. "But we're fools together. That counts for something." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close. She felt him trembling slightly, the weight of his fear and relief combined. They stood that way for a long moment. Two people who'd thought they wanted safety, discovering that what they actually needed was each other. When they finally pulled apart, Beckett's expression had changed. The despair had been replaced by something else, determination. "If we're going to do this, we need to do it right," he said. "Full transparency with the other ranchers. Honest accounting of the situation. Real partnership, not me trying to maintain control. Can you do that? Let go of that much control? I don't know. But I'm willing to try. He looked at the foreclosure papers, then at her. We have 6 weeks. That's not much time. Then we'd better get started. They spent the rest of that day going through every detail of Beckett's financial situation. Brenna brought her own savings. Not a fortune, but years of careful accumulation from trapping and trading. Combined with what Beckett could raise by selling non-essential assets, it would be enough to negotiate with the bank for an extension while they built the consortium. That evening, they drafted a proposal together. Not Beckett dictating while Brenna listened, but true collaboration. She contributed her practical knowledge of land management and resource conservation. He contributed his business expertise and understanding of legal structures. Together, they created something neither could have managed alone. As night fell and they were still working by lamplight, Beckett looked up from the papers spread between them. I need to tell you something. What? When I agreed to marry you, it was for practical reasons. You're right about that. But somewhere along the way, probably around the time you tamed that wild mare, or maybe when you defended me in town, even though you disagreed with my choices, it became something else. He reached across and touched her face gently. I don't know when exactly I fell in love with you, Brenna, but I did, and I'm sorry I can't offer you the security you came here for. All I can offer is the truth and a fight to build something together. Brenna felt her breath catch. You love me? I do. I know I have no right to expect you to. She kissed him. It was the first real kiss they'd shared. Nothing held back, nothing guarded. When they parted, both of them were breathing hard. I love you too, she said. I didn't plan to. I didn't want to. But somewhere between your stubbornness and your pain, and your slow transformation into someone who might actually let people in, I fell in love with you. Even though I'm about to lose everything, you're not losing everything. You're losing the illusion. What we're building now, that's real. That's worth fighting for. They kissed again, and this time it felt like a promise. Not the hollow promises of their original arrangement, but something solid and true. When they finally returned to reviewing their plans, everything felt different. They weren't two strangers protecting themselves through a transaction. They were partners facing an uncertain future together, armed with nothing but honesty and hope in each other. It would have to be enough. They worked through the night and into the next morning, fueled by coffee and determination. By the time the sun rose, they had a comprehensive proposal. Beckett would offer water rights as partnership assets. Participating ranchers would invest capital based on their means and receive proportional ownership in a cooperative water system. All decisions would be made collectively. Profits and losses would be shared equally. Most importantly, the proposal included complete transparency about Beckett's financial situation. No more illusions, no more pretense. Just honest numbers and an honest request for help. This could destroy what's left of my reputation, Beckett said, reviewing the document one final time. Or it could be the beginning of actually earning one, Brenna replied. One built on truth instead of facade. They brought Gideon into their confidence first. The foreman listened to everything, the debt, the foreclosure, the plan, without interrupting. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I wondered, he said finally. Some things never quite added up. The way you drove yourself, the desperation behind the hard bargaining. He looked at Beckett with something like respect. Takes courage to admit all this. Takes desperation, Beckett corrected. Sometimes they're the same thing. Gideon stood. I'll stand with you, whatever comes. You've been fair to me, paid me well even when I suspect you couldn't afford to. That loyalty goes both ways. His support steadied them both. With Gideon's help, they began preparing for the meeting. They would need to present their case to all the ranchers, answer every question, address every concern. It would be the hardest thing Beckett had ever done, standing before his community and admitting failure. Vernon Slate was the first they approached personally. He arrived at the ranch the next morning in response to their request for a private conversation. His expression was wary but curious. Mr. Drury, Mrs. Drury, what can I do for you? Beckett gestured to the porch chairs. Please sit, We have something to discuss. For the next hour, they laid out everything. The debt, the foreclosure, the proposal. Vernon's expression shifted from suspicion to surprise to cautious interest. "Let me understand this," he said when they finished. "You're asking us to invest in your ranch when the bank's about to take it from you. We're asking you to invest in a cooperative that includes water rights you desperately need, managed by someone who knows how to run a successful operation, structured in a way that protects everyone's interests," Brenna clarified. "Yes, there's risk, but there's also opportunity." Vernon rubbed his jaw, thinking, "Why should I trust you, Drury? You've been squeezing us for months." "You shouldn't," Beckett said bluntly. "Trust, I mean. Not based on my past behavior. But you should trust the numbers. Trust the legal structure we're proposing. Trust that we're all facing the same crisis, and this gives us the best chance of surviving it together. I'll need to think about it." "Talk to my wife, of course." "We're holding a general meeting in 3 days. Town hall. Everyone's invited." Beckett extended his hand. "Whatever you decide, I want to apologize for how I've treated you these past months. You were right. I had enough, and I should have shared it more fairly." Vernon shook his hand, clearly surprised by the apology. "I'll be there." "Can't promise anything beyond that." Over the next 2 days, they approached other key ranchers. Harrison Webb was skeptical, but agreed to hear them out at the meeting. Others ranged from cautiously interested to outright hostile. Each conversation was difficult, each admission of failure painful for Beckett. But Brenna saw him growing stronger through it, not weaker. Honesty, it turned out, had its own kind of power. They also met with the bank. That conversation was perhaps the hardest of all. The banker, a stern man named Thomas Garrett, listened to their proposal with an impassive expression. "You're asking for an extension based on a plan that hasn't even been approved yet," he summarized. "That's a significant risk for the bank. It's also your best chance of getting your money back," Brenna pointed out. "If you foreclose now, you'll get the property, but you'll have to sell it in a drought market at depressed prices. If you give us 8 weeks to implement this plan, you'll either get full payment or you'll foreclose on a property that's worth significantly more because of the cooperative infrastructure we're building." Garrett studied them both. "Mrs. Drury, you're putting your own money into this." "I am. Why? You could walk away, start over elsewhere, because some things matter more than money. This ranch, this community, my husband, they're worth fighting for." The banker was quiet for a moment. "I'll agree to an 8-week extension. But if you miss the new deadline, foreclosure proceeds immediately. No further negotiation." "Understood," Beckett said. "Thank you." As they left the bank, Beckett took Brenna's hand. 8 weeks. "We have 8 weeks to make this work. Then we'd better make them count." The night before the town meeting, Brenna found Beckett on the porch, staring out at the dark land. She sat beside him and they were quiet for a while, just being together. "I'm afraid," he admitted finally. "Tomorrow I stand in front of everyone and admit that I've been lying for years. That the successful businessman they thought they knew was actually drowning in debt. That I need their help to survive. I know. What if they laugh? What if they refuse? What if all of this, everything we've built, everything we're trying to do, what if it's not enough?" Brenna took his hand. "Then we'll face that together. We'll find another way. We'll keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight with, and then we'll start over somewhere else. But we won't give up, and we won't do it alone. How did I get so lucky to find you?" "You didn't find me. I found you, remember? Rode into town with a calculated plan to marry for security." She smiled. "Shows how well we planned, doesn't it? Both of us trying to avoid vulnerability, and we ended up here. Here isn't so bad." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He turned to her, his face serious in the dim light. "Brenna, if this doesn't work, if we lose the ranch, I want you to know that won't change anything for me. I love you whether I'm a rancher or a ranch hand. Whether we have property or we're starting over with nothing, that part's real no matter what happens. I know. Same for me." She kissed him softly. "Now let's go inside and get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." They went to bed together for the first time that night, not out of passion, but need. The need to hold each other, to feel less alone, to gather strength for what was coming. They lay in the darkness, hands clasped, and eventually sleep found them both. Morning came too quickly. They dressed carefully. Beckett in his best suit, Brenna in the dress Mrs. Galloway had given her weeks ago, saying every ranch wife should have something suitable for town occasions. They looked at each other in the mirror and saw two people trying to be brave when they were terrified. "Ready?" Brenna asked. "No, but let's go anyway." They rode into town together, the water rights deed and all the financial documents carefully organized in a leather case. The town hall was already filling with people when they arrived. Ranchers and their families, merchants, townspeople curious about what Beckett Drury had to say. Mrs. Galloway spotted them and came over, giving Brenna a quick hug. "Whatever happens, dear, you've got friends here. Thank you." Sheriff Talmadge helped organize the crowd. Judge Aldrich agreed to moderate the meeting, ensuring everyone got a chance to speak. As the hall filled to capacity, Brenna felt Beckett's hand tighten around hers. "You can do this," she whispered. "We can do this," he corrected. Judge Aldrich called the meeting to order. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Beckett and Brenna, standing at the front. This was it, the moment when everything would either come together or fall apart. Beckett cleared his throat and began. "Thank you all for coming. I've asked you here because I need to tell you the truth about something I should have been honest about a long time ago." He paused, gathering courage. Brenna squeezed his hand, standing with him, supporting him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "The truth is," Beckett continued, his voice growing stronger, "I'm broke. My ranch is being foreclosed on by the bank. Everything you thought you knew about my wealth and success, it's been an illusion. I've been drowning in debt for years, trying to maintain appearances while barely keeping my head above water. And I've made decisions that hurt this community because I was desperate and afraid." The room erupted in murmurs. Shocked faces, whispered conversations, looks of surprise and vindication and anger. Judge Aldrich called for order. "But I'm here now," Beckett continued once the room quieted, "to propose a solution. Not one that saves me at your expense, but one that could save all of us. My wife and I have developed a plan for a water cooperative, a true partnership where we all invest, all share in the risk, and all benefit from success." He began presenting the details, his voice steady despite his fear. Brenna watched the crowd, seeing skepticism but also interest. Vernon Slate was nodding slowly. Mrs. Galloway smiled encouragingly. Even Harrison Webb was paying attention, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. This was it. The moment when Beckett stopped running from his parents' ghosts and started building his own legacy. The moment when Brenna stopped seeking safety and started building something real. Whatever the community decided, they'd done what her brother's letter had urged her to do. They'd chosen connection over protection, truth over illusion, and each other over everything else. Now they would learn, if that was enough. Beckett laid out the numbers with brutal honesty. He showed them his debts, his assets, the bank's foreclosure timeline. He explained how water rights could be restructured as shared assets, how pooled resources could sustain them all through the drought. Brenna stood beside him, occasionally adding practical details about land management and conservation strategies she'd learned in the mountains. The presentation took nearly an hour. When it finished, silence filled the hall. Then Harrison Webb stood up, his weathered face unreadable. "Let me see if I understand this correctly. Drury, you've been acting like you're better than the rest of us, charging premium prices for water while secretly being as broke as we are. And now you want us to bail you out?" The words were harsh, and Brenna felt Beckett tense beside her. But he didn't flinch. "That's one way to look at it," he said evenly. "Another way is that I'm offering you access to resources you desperately need, structured in a way that protects everyone's investment and gives us all the best chance of survival. Yes, I benefit from this plan. But so do you. Why should we trust you?" Someone called from the back. "You shouldn't," Beckett replied. "Not blindly. That's why I'm proposing full transparency. Open books, shared decision-making, legal contracts that protect every investor. Don't trust me, trust the structure we're building." Vernon Slate stood then, and the room turned to him. "I'll say something. A few weeks ago, Mrs. Drury here helped my family when we were desperate. She sold us water at cost when Mr. Drury wouldn't budge on price. I was angry about that at the time, felt like charity, like pity. But I've had time to think about it. He looked at Beckett directly. What she did wasn't charity. It was someone recognizing that we're all in this together, that helping your neighbor survive isn't weakness, it's strength. And since then, I've watched Mr. Drury change. I've seen him struggle with decisions that used to be easy for him. I've seen his wife stand beside him when she could have walked away. Vernon turned to address the crowd. This plan might fail. We might all lose our investments. But I'd rather fail trying to work together than succeed by tearing each other apart. That's not the kind of community I want to live in. That's not the legacy I want to leave my children. Easy for you to say, Webb countered. You're not putting in as much capital as some of us would have to. Then adjust the investment tiers, Brenna said. That's what makes this a cooperative. Everyone contributes what they can. The structure accounts for different levels of participation. Judge Aldrich stood. Perhaps we should discuss the practical details. Mr. Drury, walk us through exactly how the investment structure would work. For the next half hour, they delved into specifics. How much capital would be needed? How water access would be allocated? How decisions would be made? How profits would be distributed if, when, the drought broke and operations normalized? Some people asked hostile questions, clearly skeptical. Others asked practical ones, genuinely trying to understand. Gideon stood and vouched for Beckett's competence as a rancher and businessman, separate from his financial struggles. Mrs. Galloway spoke about the importance of community cooperation, reminding everyone of times they'd helped each other in the past. Slowly, grudgingly, the conversation shifted. Not from outright rejection to enthusiastic acceptance, but from absolutely not to maybe possible. It was progress, even if painful. Then Sheriff Talmadge raised his hand. I've got a question for Mrs. Drury. All eyes turned to Brenna. She felt her heart rate increase, but kept her expression calm. Yes, Sheriff. You came to Millstone a few months ago with nothing. Married Mr. Drury in what everyone knows was an arrangement of convenience. Now you're standing here asking us to invest in a ranch that's about to be foreclosed on, putting your own money into it. He paused. Why? You could walk away from all this. Why are you staying? It was the question everyone wanted answered, Brenna realized. They could see the logic of the business plan, but they needed to understand the human element. Why would she fight for a failing ranch and a husband who deceived her about his circumstances? She took a breath and spoke from the heart. You're right that I came here seeking security. That was my plan. Marry for stability, keep myself safe. But plans change when you actually start living instead of just surviving. She glanced at Beckett, then back at the crowd. My brother raised me after our parents died. He taught me that depending on people was weakness, that the only way to be safe was to need no one. He lived that way his whole life, and he died alone because of it. I came to Millstone determined not to need anyone, and I ended up married to a man who'd made the same choice for the same reasons. But somewhere along the way, we both learned something. Isolation isn't strength, it's just fear wearing a different face. Real strength is admitting you need help. It's being honest about your failures. It's standing with people even when things are hard. She looked around the room, meeting eyes. I'm staying because that's the person I want to be. Not someone who runs when things get difficult, but someone who fights for the people and places that matter. This ranch matters. This community matters. And yes, my husband matters. That's why I'm staying and why I'm asking you to take this chance with us. The silence that followed felt different than before. Less hostile, more thoughtful. Brenna saw several people nodding, others wiping eyes. The honesty had landed. Mrs. Galloway stood again. I've known Beckett Drury since he was born. Watched his parents give everything to this community and lose it all. Watched him build walls to protect himself from the same fate. What I'm seeing now is a man who's learned that there's a middle ground between giving everything away and sharing nothing. She looked around the room. This community failed his parents when they needed help. Are we going to make the same mistake with their son? This is different. Webb protested. His parents were generous from the start. Beckett's only coming to us now because he's out of options. So what? Vernon interjected. Does it matter why someone finally asks for help? We all wait too long to admit we're struggling. That's pride, and pride has cost this valley too much already. He stood and faced the crowd. I'm investing. Whatever I can afford to put in, I'm doing it. Because Mrs. Drury's right. We're all in this together, whether we admit it or not. Judge Aldrich called for a formal discussion of terms. For another hour, they debated and negotiated. Investment amounts, water allocation formulas, decision-making processes, legal protections. It was messy and sometimes heated, but it was happening. The community was seriously considering the plan. Finally, as evening approached and the hall grew dim, Judge Aldrich called for a preliminary vote. All those in favor of moving forward with detailed contract negotiations for the proposed cooperative, raise your hands. Brenna held her breath. Beside her, she felt Beckett doing the same. This wasn't final approval, just agreement to continue working on the plan. But it was crucial. Without this vote, everything would collapse before it even started. Hands began to rise. Vernon first, without hesitation, Mrs. Galloway and several other townspeople. Some ranchers followed, more, then more still. Judge Aldrich counted carefully. When he finished, he looked at Beckett and Brenna with something like approval. Motion carries by significant majority. We'll reconvene in 3 days, with legal counsel present to draft formal contracts. The hall erupted in conversation. Some people left immediately, clearly unhappy with the outcome. Others clustered in groups, discussing details and concerns. But a substantial number approached Beckett and Brenna, offering cautious handshakes and agreeing to participate. Harrison Webb was among the last to approach. His expression was still skeptical, but he extended his hand. I'm not convinced this'll work, Drury, but I'm willing to give it a chance. One chance. Don't make me regret it. I won't, Beckett said, shaking his hand. Thank you for considering it. As the hall emptied, Brenna and Beckett stood together, exhausted and overwhelmed. They'd done it, convinced the community to at least try. It wasn't a guarantee of success, but it was hope. Real, tangible hope. Gideon approached, a rare smile on his weathered face. Well done, both of you. Your father would have been proud, Mr. Drury. Beckett's eyes grew bright. Thank you, Gideon. That means more than you know. They walked out into the evening air, the town quiet around them. Brenna leaned against Beckett, feeling the weight of the day settling into her bones. We did it, she said softly. The first step anyway. We did. He wrapped his arm around her. Together, always together, she agreed. They rode home in the gathering darkness. Two people who'd come to this land seeking safety and discovered something far more valuable, a partnership built on truth, a love born from honesty, and a community willing to give them one more chance. The fight wasn't over. They still had contracts to negotiate, money to raise, and a drought to survive. But they had hope now, and each other. It would have to be enough. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Lawyers arrived from the county seat to help draft the cooperative agreement. Every detail had to be negotiated, every concern addressed, every risk evaluated and mitigated through legal language. Beckett and Brenna found themselves in marathon meetings, sometimes working until midnight to resolve disputes between different ranchers about investment amounts or water allocation formulas. On the 3rd day, with the final meeting scheduled for that evening, they reconvened at the town hall. The document was 60 pages of dense legal text, but it represented something simple at its heart. Trust. Trust that they could work together. Trust that cooperation was stronger than isolation. Trust that community mattered more than individual advantage. Judge Aldrich called the meeting to order. The hall was packed again, though the atmosphere felt different this time. Less hostile, more purposeful. People had come to make a decision. We have the final contract ready for review and signature, the judge announced. I'll give you 1 hour to read through it carefully with the legal counsel available. Then we'll proceed to formal commitment. The room divided into clusters as ranchers consulted with lawyers and each other. Brenna watched the process with nervous energy. trying to read reactions and gauge whether they had enough support. Beckett stood beside her, outwardly calm, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. Harrison Webb was the first to approach the signing table after the hour elapsed. He laid down the contract he'd been reviewing and looked at Beckett with a hard expression. "I've been ranching 40 years, Webb said. "Built everything I have through hard work and careful dealing. Don't much like asking for help or relying on others. But I like watching this community tear itself apart even less." He picked up the pen. "You get one chance, Drury. Don't waste it." He signed his name with firm, deliberate strokes. The action sent a ripple through the room. If Harrison Webb, known as one of the most independent and skeptical ranchers in the valley, was committing, others would follow, and they did. Vernon Slate came forward next, signing without hesitation. Then another rancher, and another. Some signed eagerly, others reluctantly, but they signed. Each signature represented capital being committed, trust being extended, isolation being abandoned for interdependence. Not everyone participated. 3 ranchers left without signing, unwilling to take the risk or unable to trust Beckett enough. One merchant stood up and spoke against the plan, calling it foolish and predicting failure. But the majority remained, and the majority committed. As the signatures accumulated, Brenna felt something shift in the room. This wasn't just about saving Beckett's ranch anymore. It was about the community choosing a different path forward, choosing connection over competition, cooperation over conflict. When the last willing participant had signed, Judge Aldrich reviewed the document carefully. "We have sufficient participation to proceed. The cooperative is officially formed, pending final financial transactions and bank approval of the restructured debt." Applause broke out, tentative at first but growing stronger. People shook hands, embraced, made promises to help each other through the coming challenges. The tension that had defined the valley for months began to ease, replaced by something that felt like relief. Mrs. Galloway appeared at Brenna's side, tears in her eyes. "You did it, dear. You saved him." "He saved himself," Brenna corrected, "by finally being honest." "Maybe, but he couldn't have done it without you." The older woman squeezed her hand. "Margaret, Beckett's mother, would have loved you. You've given her son something she worried he'd never find." "What's that?" "The courage to be vulnerable. The wisdom to know that strength and kindness can coexist." Mrs. Galloway smiled through her tears. "She'd be so proud of both of you." Beckett was surrounded by ranchers now, shaking hands and discussing next steps. Brenna watched him navigate the crowd with growing confidence, no longer hiding behind walls, but engaging openly. This was who he could be, who he was becoming, a man who led through honesty rather than fear. Sheriff Talmadge approached with the signed cooperative agreement in hand. "I'll file this with the county recorder first thing tomorrow. Make it all official." He looked at Beckett seriously. "You've got a lot of work ahead of you, son. Managing this cooperative won't be easy." "I know," Beckett said, "but it's better than the alternative." "Damn sight better." The sheriff clapped him on the shoulder. "Your father would be proud." Different approach than his, but same heart underneath. As the crowd began to disperse, people made plans to meet the following week to begin implementing the cooperative's operations. Water access schedules needed to be established. Infrastructure improvements needed to be planned. Resources needed to be pooled and managed. There was enormous work ahead, but now they had a framework for doing it together. Vernon Slate was one of the last to leave. He approached Beckett and extended his hand once more. "I misjudged you. Thought you were just another rich man squeezing the rest of us. Turns out you were just as scared and desperate as we are." "More so, probably," Beckett admitted. "I just hid it better." "Well, no more hiding. We're in this together now." Vernon glanced at Brenna. "Thank you, Mrs. Drury, for pushing him toward this, for showing him there was another way." "Thank you for taking the chance," Brenna replied. "For all of you who signed, thank you for believing it was worth trying." After everyone had left, Beckett and Brenna stood alone in the empty hall. The signed contract lay on the judge's table, its pages filled with names and commitments, proof that community could still matter, that people could still choose cooperation over competition when the stakes were high enough. We still have to get the bank's approval, Beckett said, looking at the document. They could still say no to the restructured debt. They won't. The numbers work now. With the cooperative's capital and the improved value of the water rights as shared assets, it makes financial sense. Brenna moved beside him. We did it, Beckett. We actually did it. He turned to her, and she saw tears in his eyes. I was so afraid. Afraid of failing, afraid of becoming my father, afraid of ending up with nothing. And you, his voice broke slightly, you stood beside me anyway, even when I didn't deserve it. You deserved it. You just didn't believe you did. She touched his face gently. That's changing now. I can see it. He pulled her into his arms and held her close. They stood that way for a long moment. Two people who'd found each other through calculation and discovered something far deeper than either had planned for. I love you, he said into her hair, not because of what you've done for me, but because of who you are. Strong and honest and brave enough to fight for things that matter. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful every day that you rode into Millstone. I love you too, the man you are and the man you're becoming. She pulled back to look at him. We're going to make this work. The cooperative, the ranch, us, all of it. You sound certain. I am, because we're not doing it alone anymore. That was always the problem. Both of us trying to survive by ourselves, building walls instead of bridges. Now we have help. Now we have each other. Now we have a community willing to try something different. He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring into it all the emotion of the past, terrible, wonderful weeks. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Let's go home, Brenna said, our home. Tomorrow we'll deal with the bank and the lawyers and all the work ahead. But tonight, let's just be grateful we made it this far. They rode back to the ranch in the darkness, the signed contract carefully protected in Beckett's saddlebag. The land was still dry, the drought still unbroken, the challenges still enormous. But something fundamental had changed. They weren't facing it alone anymore. At the ranch, they found Gideon waiting on the porch. Well, he asked as they dismounted. They signed, Beckett said, unable to keep the relief from his voice. Enough of them to make it work. Gideon's weathered face broke into a broad smile. Then we'd best get to work. Ranch won't run itself, cooperative or not. Tomorrow, Brenna said. Tonight, we rest. The foreman nodded and headed toward the bunkhouse. Beckett and Brenna walked into their house, truly theirs now, not just his, and closed the door on the world outside. They stood in the quiet front room, just holding each other. The future was uncertain. Success wasn't guaranteed, but they had hope now, and community and each other. Whatever happens next, Beckett said quietly, thank you for teaching me that there's strength in vulnerability, that asking for help isn't weakness, that my parents weren't foolish, they just loved too much in a world that didn't always love them back. They gave you good foundations, Brenna replied. You just needed time to remember how to build on them. That night, they slept deeply for the first time in weeks, wrapped in each other's arms. The drought continued. The work remained undone. The bank still needed convincing, but they'd taken the hardest step. They'd chosen to trust. Trust each other, trust their community, trust that honesty and cooperation could be stronger than fear and isolation. And in the morning, they would begin the work of proving that choice right. 3 months later, Brenna stood on the porch in the early morning light, watching the land transform. Rain clouds gathered on the horizon. Real rain, not the false promises that had taunted them through the summer. The drought was finally breaking. The ranch looked different now, not just the greening grass or the fuller creek, but the energy. Ranch hands from 3 different properties worked together repairing the shared irrigation system. Cattle bearing. Different brands grazed side by side in the communal pastures. What had been Beckett's isolated kingdom had become something larger and more valuable, a hub of cooperation. Beckett emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Brenna and stood beside her, his arm naturally finding its way around her waist. The gesture was so familiar now, so comfortable. Hard to believe there'd been a time when they'd maintained careful distance, when touching had felt like breaking rules. "Thinking about something?" he asked. "Everything. How different things are now. Better different or worse different?" "Definitely better." She leaned into him. "Though more complicated." He laughed. "That's an understatement. Managing a cooperative is about 10 times harder than running my own operation, but more rewarding." "Surprisingly, yes." He sipped his coffee, looking out at the land. "Vernon's bringing his family for dinner tonight, and Harrison Webb actually complimented my management of the water allocation yesterday. I nearly fell over. He's come around. They all have, more or less. Even the ones who were most skeptical." Beckett paused. "I never thought I'd say this, but I like working with people instead of against them. Turns out my father understood something I didn't. That building something with others is more satisfying than protecting something alone." Gideon approached from the barn, waving a paper. "Message from the bank. They've approved the final restructuring. The ranch is officially secure." Brenna felt Beckett's entire body relax. The last 3 months had been productive, but anxious, always wondering if the bank would ultimately approve the cooperative's financial structure. Now they had confirmation. The foreclosure was permanently averted. "Thank you, Gideon. Would you tell the hands? They've earned the good news." After the foreman left, Beckett turned to Brenna with tears in his eyes. "We did it. We actually saved it. You did it. You had the courage to ask for help. We did it together," he corrected. "Without you, I never would have tried." They held each other as the sun rose higher, warming the land and their future along with it. The photograph of Beckett's parents sat on the porch rail now, moved from its hidden place in the office to a spot where it could be seen and remembered. Beside it was a new photograph taken at the first official cooperative meeting, showing Beckett and Brenna surrounded by their partners, all of them smiling with cautious hope. "Your mother would love what you've built," Brenna said, gesturing to the new photo. "Not in spite of what happened to them, but because of it. You learned from their mistakes without abandoning their values." "I hope so." He picked up the new photograph, studying the faces. "Strange how it worked out. I spent 15 years trying not to be like them, and I ended up honoring them anyway. Just took the long way around. Most good things do." Mrs. Galloway's wagon appeared on the road, bringing supplies and her weekly visit. She'd become a fixture at the ranch, helping Brenna with household management and offering wisdom whenever asked. She climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for her age. "Morning, you two. Got letters from town." She handed them several envelopes, then looked around with satisfaction. "Place looks good. Feels good. Like a home instead of just a property." "That's Brenna's doing," Beckett said. "She's the one who made it feel like more than just walls and roof." "You're both responsible," Mrs. Galloway corrected. "A home takes 2 people building it together." She started unloading supplies. "Vernon's family is coming for dinner tonight?" "Yes, and Harrison Webb's family next week. Apparently we're hosting rotating cooperative dinners now." "Good. Community needs that. Needs to see each other as people instead of just business partners." She paused. "Heard some interesting news in town. Young couple asking about available land, thinking of starting a ranch. Word spread about what you've done here, and people are interested in joining a community that works together." Brenna and Beckett exchanged glances. The idea that their cooperative might attract new families, might grow beyond just surviving the drought, that was something they hadn't fully considered. "We'll need to discuss expansion at the next meeting," Beckett said. "Make sure everyone's comfortable with the idea." "They will be," Mrs. Galloway said confidently. "You've proven the model works. Now others want to be part of it." "Oh, that's success, dear. Real lasting success." That evening, the house filled with voices and laughter. Vernon Slate and his wife brought their children, who ran through the rooms with the kind of energy that only comes from security and enough food. Harrison Webb arrived unexpectedly with a pie from his wife. an offering of genuine friendship rather than grudging cooperation. They ate together around the expanded dining table, the same table where Brenna and Beckett had once sat at opposite ends in careful silence. Now it was crowded and warm, filled with conversation about water management and cattle prices, and whose children would attend the new school being planned for next year. After dinner, while the children played outside and the adults talked on the porch, Vernon pulled Beckett aside. "Never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for how things worked out. My ranch is more stable now than it's been in 5 years. My family's secure, and I have partners I can call on when trouble comes. That's worth more than independence." "I'm learning that," Beckett said. "Took me long enough. Took all of us long enough. We're stubborn people out here. Pride's practically a survival trait." Vernon looked at Brenna, who was showing Mrs. Slate the garden she'd expanded. "You married well, Drury. Woman like that, practical, strong, but with a heart big enough to push you toward better choices. That's rare, I know. Luckiest decision I ever made? Even though it started as a business arrangement? Especially because it did. We came to it honestly, without illusions. Everything we've built since has been real." As the evening wound down and guests departed with promises to return soon, Brenna and Beckett stood on the porch, watching the last wagon disappear down the road. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. "Rain," Brenna said simply, holding out her hand to catch the drops. "Real rain." Beckett joined her, both of them standing in the gentle rainfall that marked the drought's end. The land would recover. The cooperative would grow stronger. Their community would thrive. "Do you remember what you asked me that first night?" Beckett said. "About whether two people who married for all the wrong reasons could find something worth more than gold." "I remember. I know the answer now." He took her hand, rainwater mixing with his touch. "It wasn't that we married for the wrong reasons. We married for incomplete reasons. We were each seeking something we thought we needed, not understanding that what we actually needed was each other. Security isn't about having resources or guarantees. It's about having someone who sees all of you and stays anyway." Brenna looked at him, this man who'd been a stranger just months ago, who'd become a partner, then a friend, then something deeper than either. "My brother wrote in his letter that he wanted me to find connection, to build a life worth living instead of just surviving. I thought I was coming here to survive. Turns out I was coming here to finally live." We both were. They kissed in the rain. Two people who'd planned for safety and discovered something far more valuable. Love that grew from honesty, partnership that came from vulnerability, and a future built together instead of protected alone. Later, as they lay in bed listening to the rain steady on the roof, Beckett spoke into the darkness. "Thank you. For what?" "For riding into Millstone with a practical plan, and then being brave enough to abandon it for something real. For teaching me that my parents weren't foolish, just loving. For standing with me when I had to admit failure. For making me believe that cooperation could be stronger than isolation." "Thank you for being willing to learn," Brenna replied. "For having the courage to change. For showing me that security isn't about walls. It's about knowing someone will catch you when you fall. Always," he promised. "No matter what comes, we'll face it together." "Together," she agreed. The rain continued through the night, soaking into the thirsty earth, filling the creeks, greening the grass. By morning the land looked renewed, not saved by one person's strength or wealth, but restored through cooperation, community, and the willingness to trust. Brenna stood at the window watching the sunrise paint the wet land gold. Behind her, Beckett stirred awake. He joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Beautiful morning," he said. "Beautiful life," she corrected. And it was. Not perfect. They still faced challenges, still had work to do, still navigated the complexities of managing a cooperative and building a marriage simultaneously. But it was real. Built on truth instead of illusion, strengthened by community instead of isolation, grounded in love that came from seeing each other completely and choosing to stay. She'd ridden into Millstone, seeking security, and found something far more precious. A home, a partner, and the understanding that real wealth isn't measured in money or guarantees. It's measured in connections made, communities built, and the courage to be vulnerable enough to let someone truly know you. That was the lesson the mountain woman taught the rich man. That was what real wealth meant, and in learning it together, they'd saved not just a ranch but themselves.